Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first night in the cabin near Stowe, I convinced myself the sounds were just the old wood settling. Vermont winters make buildings creak, everyone knows that. But by the third night, when the shuffling footsteps above my head followed a deliberate path from one end of the attic to the other, I couldn't pretend anymore. I'd rented the place for 3 months, planning to use the isolation to focus on my custom furniture commissions. The owner, an elderly woman who lived in Burlington, had been almost apologetically eager to rent it. "It's been empty for years," she'd said over the phone, her voice crackling through poor reception. "My late husband's family built it in the 50s. Just needs someone to care for it again." The cabin sat on 40 acres of pine forest, the nearest neighbor a half-mile down an unpaved road that would become impassable with the first serious snowfall. Perfect for a woodworker who needed space and quiet. The detached workshop behind the main structure sealed the deal. Heated, wired for my power tools, with enough room for my larger projects. Those footsteps, though, they weren't random. Each night around 2:30, they'd begin near the chimney and work their way across to the far wall, the wall that faced north and never seemed to warm up no matter how high I cranked the thermostat. The attic access was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling, secured from below with a padlock I'd added myself after hearing the first sounds. No one could be up there. No one. On the fourth morning, I found my chisels. I'm meticulous about my tools. Every evening I clean them, oil them if needed, and lay them out on my workbench in order of size. That morning, they'd been moved. Not scattered or knocked over, deliberately repositioned to form arrows on the workshop floor, all pointing toward the main cabin. The scraped grooves in the old pine boards ran deep enough to catch my fingernail. I spent that day installing motion-activated cameras in the workshop. The next morning, the footage showed nothing, just 4 hours of static darkness between 2:27 and 6:31 a.m. The timestamp never jumped. The recording never stopped. Just nothing. But my coping saw, my marking gauge, and my mortise chisel had been arranged on the floor, pointing toward the cabin's north wall. The pattern continued for a week. Each morning, different tools formed arrows pointing to that same wall. The one that stayed cold. The one where frost formed on the inside during particularly bitter nights. Despite the insulation, I could see through gaps in the pine paneling. I started sleeping in the workshop, telling myself it was to catch whoever was playing tricks. The footsteps in the cabin's attic continued without me there to hear them. I know because I set up a recorder. The playback revealed the same measured pace, the same route from chimney to cold wall, over and over. But something else emerged in the recordings, a sound like breathing or wind through a narrow space that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. By the second week, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know what was behind that north wall. I waited for daylight, as if that would protect me from whatever I might find. The insulation came away easily, too easily, as if it had been removed and replaced before. Behind it, set into what should have been the exterior wall, was a small door. Not a proper door, really. More like a hatch, maybe 2 feet square, with iron hinges that belonged to a much older style of craftsmanship than the 1950s cabin. My hands shook as I pried it open. Cold air rushed out, colder than the December morning, colder than any air had a right to be. The space beyond was impossible. From outside, I'd measured the cabin's footprint multiple times. This wall was the exterior wall. There was no room for any space beyond it. Yet my flashlight beam penetrated at least 6 feet into darkness before hitting another wall. The wooden floor of the hidden space was covered in dust except for footprints. They led from the hatch to the far wall and back, over and over, creating a worn path. But the strangest part was how the prints seemed to emerge from the wood itself at the far wall, as if someone had walked through solid matter. I should have left then. Packed my tools, broken the lease, driven back to Boston. Instead, I became obsessed with understanding the impossible geometry. I measured everything. The cabin's exterior was exactly 32 feet long. The interior was 32 feet long, yet that hidden space extended 6 feet beyond what should have been the outer wall. I checked from outside again and again. Snow had begun to fall, and my footprints circled the cabin like the orbits of an unstable planet. The arrows began appearing in the main cabin after I opened that hatch. I'd wake to find my books arranged in formation on the coffee table, pointing toward my bedroom. The kitchen knives would be laid out on the counter, all indicating the same direction. Once, I found every piece of furniture, couch, chairs, dining table, rotated to face my bedroom door. I hadn't heard a thing. I stopped sleeping altogether by the 3rd week. Instead, I sat in my bedroom with my back to the wall, watching the door. Sometimes I'd hear the footsteps directly overhead, even though my bedroom was in a single-story section of the cabin. When I'd check, fresh footprints would mark the dust in the hidden space, always ending at that impossible far wall. The turning point came when I discovered the photographs. I'd been documenting everything obsessively: the tool arrangements, the footprints, the impossible room. When I reviewed the photos on my laptop, I noticed something in the hidden space images. In each photo, if I enhanced the brightness and contrast, a figure appeared in the darkness. Just a suggestion of a shape, tall, thin, pressed against that far wall. In successive photos, taken minutes apart, it had moved closer to the hatch. I went back to check the space. No figure. But new footprints led from the far wall to the hatch, and for the first time, they continued out into the cabin proper. The dusty impressions traced a path along the hallway floor, growing fainter with each step, until they stopped at my bedroom door. That night, I heard breathing that wasn't mine. It came from inside the walls, a slow, patient rhythm that seemed to move through the wooden studs and insulation like water through pipes. I followed the sound with growing horror as it traced the same path as those footprints, from the north wall, along the hallway, stopping just outside my bedroom. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. There hadn't been for days, I realized. The snow had been falling steadily, and the access road was certainly blocked by now. My truck, when I checked through the window, was buried up to its door handles. The breathing inside the walls grew louder. I write this now by lamplight, my back pressed against my bedroom's south wall, as far from that cold north wall as I can get. The arrows have changed. This morning, every tool in my workshop, every book and piece of furniture in the cabin, even the fallen pine needles on the porch, all point to where I'm sitting right now. The footprints in the hidden space have multiplied. When I checked an hour ago, the dust showed dozens of paths, all leading from that impossible far wall to the hatch. All fresh. All made while I was standing right there, watching nothing make them. The temperature keeps dropping, not outside, inside the walls. I can see my breath, but the thermometer reads 68 degrees. Frost is forming on the inside of the windows, but only in patterns that look almost like someone pressing their face against the glass from within the pane itself. I've realized something about the cabin's geometry that makes my chest tight with panic. If that hidden space extends 6 feet beyond where it should, and if something can walk through the far wall, then maybe the walls aren't boundaries at all. Maybe they're just markers, thin membranes between here and somewhere else, somewhere colder. The breathing in the walls has words in it now, not English, not any language I recognize, but repetitive, rhythmic, like a chant or prayer. It's coming from all the walls simultaneously, creating a harmony that makes my teeth ache. I just checked the photos again. The figure is clearer in the latest ones. It's not standing against the far wall anymore. It's halfway through it, as if the wood is liquid. Its face, if it has a face, is turned toward the camera, toward where I was standing. In the very last photo, taken just before I sealed the hatch with every nail I could find, it's smiling. The footsteps above have stopped. For the first time in weeks, the attic is silent, but I can hear breathing directly behind the wall I'm leaning against. Slow, patient, waiting. The frost on the windows is spreading, forming letters I don't want to read. My tools in the workshop are scraping against the floor. I can hear them rearranging themselves again. I'm going to try to reach my truck, The snow might be deep, but staying here feels like sinking into something that wears the shape of a cabin but isn't one anymore. Maybe never was. The elderly woman who rented it to me, I looked her up online when I still had signal. She died in 1987. The wall behind me is getting colder. Cold enough that my shirt is sticking to it with frost. When I pull away, I can see my outline in ice on the wood, like a shadow frozen in place. Inside that outline, the wood looks different. Older, like it's been there much longer than the rest of the cabin. I can see my breath, but now it's not dissipating. It hangs in the air, forming shapes that look almost like arrows, pointing back toward the wall. The hidden space shouldn't exist, but it does. The footprints shouldn't appear on their own, but they do. And now I understand that the arrows were never threats. They were invitations, directions. The same way you'd mark a trail through the woods so someone could follow, or so something could follow you back. The breathing in the walls has synchronized with mine. When I hold my breath, it holds too. When I gasp, it gasps. But it's always a half second behind, like an echo, or like something learning to mimic. I'm leaving now. I have to. The walls are all cold now, all of them frosted from the inside. My footprints on the floor are filling with that same frost, marking where I've been like a map, leading from my bedroom to the front door, just like the footprints in the hidden space led from the far wall to here. I understand now. The cabin isn't haunted. It's not cursed. It's just built in the wrong place, built partway into somewhere else. And something that lives in that somewhere else has been trying to cross over, using the paths we make, footprints, tool marks, even our breath in the air, as bridges. The front door is frozen shut. I'm using my shoulder, all my weight, but the ice is on the inside of the wood, in the grain itself. Through the frosted window, I can see my truck, my escape, just 20 feet away. Behind me, I hear footsteps, not from the attic, from my bedroom, slow, shuffling, following the path I just walked, following my footprints in the frost. The door cracks, splinters, finally gives way. The cold outside is warm compared to what's behind me. I run through the snow, not looking back, my breath coming in clouds that hang in the air too long, forming arrows pointing back toward the cabin. I make it to the truck. The engine turns over on the third try. In the rearview mirror, the cabin looks normal. Warm light in the windows, smoke from the chimney. Inviting, like somewhere you'd want to return. But in the reflection of my rearview mirror, in just the right light, I can see footprints in the snow beside mine. Following my path, stopping where the truck was parked. I'm driving now, writing this at a rest stop 50 miles from Stowe. I'm never going back. But sometimes, when I breathe on cold glass, the condensation forms patterns that look like arrows, all pointing north, pointing back. And last night, in my Boston apartment, I heard familiar footsteps above my top floor unit, where there is no floor above, where there shouldn't be any space at all. Story 2. The notification pierced through the thick veil of sleep at 3:47 a.m., its sharp digital chime dragging me from dreams I couldn't quite remember. My phone's screen cast an eerie blue glow across the bedroom ceiling. Smart lock engaged, cabin occupied. I sat up, heart already racing. The cabin, my rental property 40 miles north in the Idaho wilderness, should have been empty. The last guests had checked out 3 days ago, and the next booking wasn't until Friday. My fingers fumbled with the security app, pulling up the live camera feeds. Empty. Every single room showed nothing but furniture and shadows. Yet the occupancy sensors told a different story. The hallway motion detector registered movement. Steady, methodical pacing. 7 steps forward. Pause. 7 steps back. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision, each cycle taking exactly 23 seconds. I watched the counter tick upward. 47 passes, 48, 49. I threw on yesterday's clothes, grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The drive would take an hour in good conditions, but the mountain roads at night were treacherous. As I navigated the winding asphalt, my phone continued its barrage of notifications. Door sensor triggered, window sensor triggered, temperature dropping in the master bedroom, 68 degrees, 65, 61. The cabin materialized from the darkness like a ship emerging from fog, its cedar exterior absorbing the moonlight rather than reflecting it. From the outside, it looked exactly as it should. Dark windows, locked doors, the porch light casting its familiar amber circle. But the app insisted someone was inside, walking those same 7 steps over and over. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening. The forest pressed in from all sides, pine trees swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. The smart lock recognized my phone and clicked open before I could touch the handle. A convenience feature that now felt invasive, as if the cabin itself was inviting me in. The entryway was cold, far colder than the app had indicated. My breath misted in the air, and I could see frost forming on the edges of the welcome mat. The hallway stretched ahead, lit only by the pale green glow of the smoke detector's LED. That's when I saw them, the handprints. They started at shoulder height on the left wall, wet and glistening in the dim light. Each print was perfectly formed, fingers splayed wide, as if someone had been feeling their way along the corridor. They followed the exact path indicated by the motion sensors, 7 steps forward, ending at the bathroom door, then switching to the opposite wall for the return journey. I reached for the light switch, and the moment fluorescent brightness flooded the space, the handprints vanished. Not dried, not faded, simply gone, as if they had never existed. I stood there breathing hard, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Condensation, maybe. Some trick of the emergency lighting. I flicked the switch off. The handprints returned immediately, darker now, dripping steadily onto the hardwood floor. The drops made no sound as they fell, pooling into shapes that looked almost like footprints before dissolving into the grain of the wood. My phone buzzed. The app showed a new reservation, dated 3 weeks ago, for a guest whose name was just a string of numbers. 47231923. The same numbers as the motion sensor pattern. I scrolled through the booking history, and my stomach dropped. Dozens of reservations I'd never seen before, all with numerical names, all for dates that had already passed. Some were from months ago, others from years before I'd even bought the property. The temperature in the hallway plummeted. Ice crystals began forming on the windows, spreading in fractal patterns across the glass. Through the frost, I could see something moving outside, a dark shape pacing the tree line with the same mechanical precision as the sensor readings. 7 steps forward. Pause. 7 steps back. I forced myself to move deeper into the cabin, following the wet handprints that seemed to pulse with each step I took. They led to the living room, where the prints climbed the walls, circling the framed photographs I'd hung to give the place a homey feel. Each picture showed the cabin at different stages of renovation, a visual timeline of my investment. But in the darkness, with only my phone's flashlight for illumination, the images looked wrong. The cabin in the photos was identical to mine, but the backgrounds were different. Instead of pine forest, there were other structures, buildings that shouldn't exist, architectural impossibilities that hurt to look at directly. And in each photo, barely visible in the windows, was the same figure, tall, indistinct, standing perfectly still. I aimed my phone at one picture, zooming in on the figure. The image pixelated, reformed, pixelated again. For just a moment I could swear I saw a face, human-like, but stretched, as if someone had grabbed a normal face and pulled it like taffy. Then my phone crashed, the screen going black before rebooting to the home screen. When the app reloaded, the reservation history had changed again. Now there were hundreds of bookings, overlapping dates creating an impossible calendar where multiple guests occupied the same space simultaneously. The names were all numbers now, some matching dates, others forming patterns I couldn't decipher. The earliest reservation was from 1987, 15 years before the cabin was built. A notification popped up. New guest has checked in. The front door's smart lock engaged behind me with a definitive click. I spun around, but the entryway was empty. The wet handprints, however, had multiplied. They covered both walls now, overlapping and interweaving, creating a tunnel of dripping impressions that led back toward the bedrooms. The moisture wasn't water. It was too thick, too dark, moving with a viscosity that reminded me of motor oil, but smelled of ozone and copper. The motion sensors were going haywire. Every room showed movement simultaneously, impossible patterns of presence that suggested dozens of occupants walking through walls, through furniture, through each other. The app's interface glitched, showing room temperatures that couldn't exist. Absolute zero in the bathroom, 500 degrees in the kitchen, numbers that flickered and changed faster than I could read them. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. The Wi-Fi was connected, showing full bars, but every number I dialed went straight to a recording. The tenant you are trying to reach is not available. Please check your reservation and try again. The handprints began to move, not the hands making them, the prints themselves, sliding along the walls like living things. They maintained their shape but flowed like liquid, converging on the master bedroom door. I followed, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain, my feet matching the 7-step pattern without conscious thought. The bedroom was wrong. The furniture was mine, arranged exactly as I'd left it, but the proportions were off. The ceiling was too high, the corners too sharp, the shadows falling in directions that defied the single overhead light. On the bed, the sheets were disturbed, pressed down in the shape of a body that wasn't there, or wasn't visible. As I watched, the impression deepened, as if someone was settling into the mattress. The pillow compressed, the blankets pulled back. The app chimed. Guest comfort mode activated, temperature adjusting to preference. The room began to warm, but not evenly. Pockets of heat and cold created a patchwork of climate zones that made my skin crawl. I could feel breath on my neck, warm, humid exhalations that shouldn't exist. When I turned, nothing was there, but the sensation moved to my cheek, my forehead, circling me like something examining its prey. I stumbled backward, hitting the dresser. The framed photos on top clattered, and one fell, its glass shattering. But instead of scattered shards, the pieces arranged themselves into a pattern, numbers again, the same sequence from the reservations. As I stared, trying to make sense of it, the fragments began to vibrate, humming at a frequency that made my teeth ache. The app showed a message in the guest communication log. Thank you for accepting our extended stay. We have been waiting. We. The plural hit me like ice water. I looked at the motion sensors again, really looked at the data. The patterns weren't random. They were synchronized, coordinated movements of multiple entities following preset routes through the cabin. The handprints weren't from one set of hands, but dozens, all following the same path, layered on top of each other in a palimpsest of presence. The reservation system crashed and rebooted, showing a new interface I'd never seen before. Instead of dates and names, it displayed something else: coordinates, timestamps, and a single word repeated over and over: occupied. Every entry was marked occupied, going back decades, centuries, times that made no sense. Future dates too, stretching forward into years that hadn't happened yet. All of them here, in this space, simultaneously present and absent. I ran for the door, but the smart lock wouldn't respond to my phone. The manual override required a code I'd never set, numbers that appeared on the keypad that shouldn't exist, symbols that hurt to perceive, that seemed to shift and writhe under my fingers. The handprints were everywhere now, covering the ceiling, the floor, even appearing on my clothes, where unseen hands grasped and pulled. The app showed my location not as the cabin, but as somewhere else. Coordinates that placed me simultaneously in thousands of locations, all of them labeled with the same address. My phone rang. The caller ID showed my own number. I answered, hearing my own voice but distorted, multiplied, speaking from every corner of the room. Checkout time was 40 years ago. You're in violation of the rental agreement. The cabin's lights began to strobe, cycling through spectrums visible and invisible. In the moments of darkness, I could see them. The other tenants. They stood in impossible numbers, occupying the same space without collision. their forms translucent and overlapping. Some were human-shaped but wrong, stretched or compressed by forces I couldn't understand. Others were just suggestions of presence, movements without bodies, intentions without form. They all moved in the same pattern. 7 steps forward, pause, 7 steps back. I felt myself beginning to move with them, my body falling into the rhythm against my will. My phone's screen cracked, displaying reservation after reservation, all of them mine, all of them for dates I didn't remember, stays I couldn't recall. The earliest was from before I was born. The latest was after I would die. The smart lock disengaged. The door swung open, revealing not the forest outside, but another hallway, identical to the one behind me. The handprints led in both directions, an infinite corridor of wet impressions and mechanical movement. I ran through the door and found myself in the same cabin, but older, newer, different. The renovation photos showed other versions. The cabin burned, rebuilt, destroyed by time, restored by hands that weren't quite human. In each iteration, the same figures stood in the windows, waiting. My phone buzzed one last time. A review had been posted on the rental listing. Excellent stay. The host was very accommodating. We will definitely be returning. We never left. 5 stars. I'm still in the cabin, or maybe I never was. The app shows me as both owner and guest, present and absent, checking in and checking out in an endless loop. The handprints follow me wherever I go, but I've stopped trying to run. Sometimes I see myself in the security cameras, pacing the hallway. 7 steps forward, pause, 7 steps back. The reservation system shows a new booking for tonight. The name is just numbers. 3472311923. The same as my phone number, if you remove the area code. The check-in time is 3:47 a.m. It's always 3:47 a.m. here. The smart lock is about to engage. Someone's coming. Or maybe they're already here. Maybe they've always been here. Maybe I've always been here, walking these halls, leaving wet handprints that disappear in the light. I check the app one more time. There's a message in the host communications. Thank you for providing the space. We needed somewhere to exist. I understand now. The cabin isn't haunted. It's occupied. Infinitely, eternally occupied by things that need space to be. And I'm the host who can never leave, managing a property that exists in states that shouldn't be possible, for guests who check in, but never truly check out. The motion sensors are still counting. The number keeps climbing, but it doesn't matter anymore. In the darkness, we all pace together, following the paths worn into reality by repetition and necessity. 7 steps forward, pause, 7 steps back, the rhythm of existence in a place that's simultaneously empty and infinitely full. My phone buzzes. Another booking. Another version of myself, probably, coming to check on the cabin that shouldn't have anyone in it. I wonder if he'll see the handprints. I wonder if he'll understand before it's too late. I wonder if there was ever a difference between the host and the guest. The smart lock clicks. Someone's here. Story 3. The fluorescent lights in the KXNM studio flicker with the persistence of dying moths, casting intermittent shadows across the weathered soundboard. It's 1:47 a.m., and I've been running the midnight shift at this decrepit AM station on the outskirts of Albuquerque for 3 months now, long enough to know which floorboards creak, which dials stick, and exactly how many seconds of dead air I can get away with before the station manager calls from his bed, voice thick with sleep and irritation, but not long enough to understand what happens at 2:13. I discovered it during my second week. The request line, a rotary phone that barely anyone calls anymore, would light up at exactly 2:13 a.m. No ring, just the soft glow of the indicator bulb. When I'd pick up, a man's voice, gravelly and distant, would request the same song every time. Play Shadows on the Mesa by Blind Willie Torreon. The first few times, I explained we didn't have that record. The voice would pause, then respond with the same words each time. Check again tomorrow. It'll be there. Of course, it never was. Tonight feels different. The air in the studio hangs heavy despite the October chill seeping through the single-pane windows. My coffee has gone cold, forming an oily film on its surface that reflects the on-air sign like a warning. Through the booth window, the parking lot stretches empty under sodium lights that turn everything the color of old bones. I cue up the next track, some forgettable country ballad that fills the 2 a.m. slot, and lean back in my chair. The springs protest with a sound like distant laughter. That's when I notice the reel-to-reel recorder in the corner, its spools turning despite being disconnected for years. The maintenance guy said it was broken beyond repair, just another piece of equipment waiting to be hauled away when the budget allowed. Yet there it is, recording nothing onto magnetic tape that shouldn't exist. I approach it slowly, my reflection multiplying in the dark windows that line the studio. Each step feels monitored, as if the very air is taking notes. The tape is moving at exactly 7.5 inches per second, broadcast standard. When I press the monitor button, static fills my headphones, then clears. It's my voice, but wrong. Pitched slightly lower, speaking words I haven't said. And that was Moonlight Serenade by Glenn Miller. Coming up on 2:13, we have a special request that's been waiting 47 years to be played. But first, a word of caution to our listeners, and to myself. Don't look at the studio window. Not yet. Not until the condensation spells it out completely. My actual voice, live on air, is discussing tomorrow's weather. The disconnect makes my teeth ache. I rewind the tape. The voice, my voice, continues backward, revealing more. The parking lot isn't empty. It never was. The sodium lights just can't illuminate what's standing there, waiting for permission to enter. The door will knock 3 times at 2:27. Under no circumstances should you. The tape snaps. The loose end whips around the spool like a frantic snake before going still. 2:09 a.m. I return to the booth, trying to maintain professional composure for the 0 to 3 listeners who might be tuned in. My hands shake as I introduce the next song, something about lost love and dusty roads. Through the window, condensation begins forming on the outside of the glass despite the dry desert air. At first, it's random, just moisture beating in the cold. Then patterns emerge, letters. They start at the corner, barely visible. D, then O, then N. I force myself to look away, focusing on the console. The VU meters dance to the music, their needles swaying like metronomes counting down to something inevitable. In my peripheral vision, more letters appear on the glass, but I don't read them, can't read them, won't. 2:11 a.m. The air in the studio shifts, becomes dense like before a thunderstorm. My ears pop. The fluorescent lights stop flickering and burn steady, too bright, casting everything in harsh relief. Every scratch on the console, every coffee stain on the desk, every imperfection stands out like an accusation. The country song ends. Dead air. I scramble for the next track, anything to fill the silence, but my fingers won't cooperate. They hover over the buttons like I'm trying to remember a language I never learned. That's when I hear it. The echo. It's subtle at first, barely a delay. My voice from the speakers, announcing the station ID, followed by the same words a half-second later, quieter from somewhere else in the building. But as I listen, I realize the echo isn't following my words. It's preceding them. KXNM, broadcasting from the high desert, the echo says. Then I hear myself say it. The time is now 2:12 a.m., the echo announces. My mouth opens, forms the words involuntarily. I'm not speaking, I'm repeating. 2:13 a.m. The request line's bulb glows. My hand reaches for it against my will, muscles moving with practiced familiarity. The receiver is cold against my ear, cold enough to burn. Play Shadows on the Mesa by Blind Willie Torreon, the voice says. But this time I recognize it. It's mine. Older, rougher, but undeniably mine. We don't have that record, I respond, the words automatic. Check again tomorrow. It'll be there. A pause. It's been there for 47 years, waiting. You've played it every night at this time. You just don't remember yet. The line goes dead. I set the receiver down and turn to the record library. There, between Willie Nelson and Tammy Wynette, is an album I've never seen before. The cover is water damaged, the vinyl inside probably unplayable. The label reads, Shadows on the Mesa by Blind Willie Torreon, recorded October 1976. The same month, according to the faded notation on the sleeve, that the previous midnight, DJ disappeared without explanation. My hands move without my permission, pulling the record out, placing it on the turntable. The needle drops, and instead of music, there's a recording. If you're hearing this, it means the loop has started again. I'm sorry. I tried to warn myself, yourself, but the transmission only goes one way. Forward into the past, backward into the future. The echo you're hearing isn't an echo. It's the original broadcast. You're the echo. You've always been the echo. The voice is definitely mine, but weathered by years I haven't lived. The thing in the parking lot has been waiting since 1976. It needs permission to enter, but not from you. From the you that hasn't happened yet. The you that's already knocked on the door. Don't look at the window. The message it's spelling isn't a warning. It's an invitation. Once you read it completely, once you understand what you're agreeing to, the timeline locks. I glance at the window involuntarily. The condensation has spread, letters covering the entire surface. I can make out my name, the time, 2:27 a.m., and something else. Instructions, directions, a contract written in moisture that shouldn't exist. The only way to break the cycle is to not play the next part of this recording. Let the station go to dead air. Let them fire you. Leave town. Forget this place exists. But you won't. Because I didn't. Because in 47 years you'll be making this recording, hoping someone, yourself, finally listens. The record continues spinning, but silent now. Waiting. I could lift the needle, walk out, drive until the desert swallows the memory of this place. But through the soundproof walls, I hear something. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, measured, approaching the studio door. They stop just outside. 2:24 a.m. The condensation on the window shifts, rearranges. The letters become clearer, more insistent. My name appears again, larger, and below it, a single word, witness. The echo of my voice starts again, speaking tomorrow's words today. And that was Shadows on the Mesa, a request from a longtime listener. Speaking of time, have you ever wondered if the present is just the past's way of becoming the future? Or if we're all just recordings, playing out our parts while the real performance happened years ago? I'm saying these words now, live, but I don't mean to. They're being pulled from me. The footsteps resume. Closer. 2:26 a.m. I stand, the chair rolling backward into shadow. Every instinct screams to run, but my legs carry me toward the studio door instead. Through the small window, the hallway is dark except for the red exit sign at the far end. Its light doesn't reach the space directly outside the door. Something is standing there, a shape that doesn't quite fit the darkness, like a person-shaped hole in reality. It raises what might be an arm. 2:27 a.m. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. The sound reverberates through the studio, through my bones, through time itself. The condensation on the window has formed complete sentences now. I try not to read them, but the words force themselves into my consciousness. You have already agreed. In 47 years, you agreed. The broadcast must continue. The frequency must be maintained. Open the door and accept what you have already accepted. My hand is on the doorknob. The metal is ice cold and burning simultaneously. Through the small window, the darkness shifts, anticipating. The record player clicks, the needle moving to the next track on its own. My older voice returns, resigned. You're going to open it. You have to. Because I already did. Because in 47 years, you'll record this message, knowing it won't change anything. The station needs a keeper. The frequency needs a voice. And something needs to be let in, over and over, night after night, until time itself forgets which came first, the broadcast or the echo. I turn the knob. The door opens inward, revealing the hallway. It's empty, but the darkness moves, flows into the studio like smoke with purpose. The temperature drops 20 degrees in an instant. My breath fogs the air, mingles with something else breathing, something that shouldn't be. The lights flicker once, twice, then steady. When I turn back to the console, someone is sitting in my chair. Me. Older, grayer, wearing the same flannel shirt but weathered by decades. I look up with eyes that have seen this moment from both sides. "Your shift is over," he says with my voice, aged like whiskey left too long in the barrel. My shift is beginning. Again, I want to speak, to demand answers, but my throat closes. The older me continues. "In 47 years, you'll sit in this chair and say these words to yourself. You'll try to change them, add warnings, provide escape routes. But the script is already written. The broadcast is already scheduled. The condensation on the window evaporates instantly, leaving no trace. The parking lot outside is no longer empty. Cars from different decades fill the spaces. A 76 Chevelle, an 89 Ford pickup, a 2003 Honda Civic, all covered in dust, their windows dark. Those are ours, the older me explains. Every version that's walked through that door. We keep coming back, thinking this time will be different, but the frequency needs us, needs our voice, needs the echo to justify the original." The record player spins to silence. The on-air sign flickers off. "Go home," he says. "Come back tomorrow night, and the next. In 47 years, you'll understand. Or maybe you already do." I back toward the door, my feet moving without conscious thought. In the hallway, the darkness has weight, presence. It follows me to the exit, ensures I leave, ensures I'll return. Outside, my car is already running, exhaust visible in the cold desert air. I don't remember starting it. As I drive away, the radio turns on by itself, tuned to KXNM. My voice, but not my voice, not yet, reads the weather. Clear skies tonight with morning fog expected. Visibility will be limited, especially around the old AM tower off Route 47. Drivers are advised to use caution. Time now is 2:33 a.m., and here's a classic from 1976. The blues begins to play, Shadows on the Mesa. I've never heard it before. I've heard it every night for 47 years. As I drive home through the empty desert roads, one truth settles into my bones like winter. I'll be back tomorrow night. Not because I want to, but because I already have been. The echo came before the voice. The answer preceded the question. And somewhere in the static between AM frequencies, 47 years from now, I'm recording a warning that I've already ignored. The cycle continues. The broadcast never ends. It just echoes. Story 4. The warehouse complex sprawls across 40 acres of Toledo's industrial district like a concrete organism that learned to hibernate. Box 7 runs 2 degrees colder than the others, always has, even when I check the breakers and find nothing drawing power. I've been walking these rows for 3 years now, and I've learned to accept certain things. The cold is one of them. The disappearances are another. It started with screws. I'd find them missing from my toolbox during the 2 a.m. rounds, only to discover them arranged in perfect spirals on the loading dock of Box 14, 300 meters away. The concrete floors here have a peculiar quality. They seem to absorb small objects, pulling them down through hairline cracks that shouldn't exist in solid cement. Hours later, sometimes days, these items resurface elsewhere in the complex, following patterns I've been trying to map in a notebook that itself went missing last Tuesday. Tonight, the November wind cuts through the gaps between buildings, creating harmonics that sound almost like breathing. I adjust my radio on my belt, a nervous habit I've developed since things started migrating on their own. The flashlight beam catches frost patterns on the windows of Box 7, even though it's 52 degrees outside. Inside that particular warehouse, my breath always fogs, regardless of the season. The security office sits at the complex's heart, a glorified shipping container converted into a monitoring station. 16 screens show feeds from cameras that capture nothing but empty corridors and loading bays. I've watched the recordings frame by frame, trying to understand how objects move between locations without ever appearing on camera. The footage shows me placing my coffee mug on the desk at 11:47 p.m. At 11:48, the mug is gone. At 2:15 a.m., camera 12 shows it sitting on a forklift seat in box 9, still steaming. My supervisor thinks I'm losing things, getting confused in the repetitive maze of identical structures. But I know better. The complex has its own circulation system, an invisible network that redistributes objects according to rules I can't comprehend. Each building connects to this circuit at specific points, usually corners where the foundation meets the earth, or spots where the overhead lights flicker without electrical cause. 3 weeks ago, my keys vanished from my pocket while I was checking the perimeter fence. I found them 4 hours later, hanging from a pipe valve 20 feet off the ground in box 11. They were wet, dripping with water that smelled like copper and old electricity. There's no water source in box 11. There hasn't been plumbing there since the previous tenants, a medical supply company, moved out in 2019. The pattern intensified last month. Instead of simple displacement, objects began returning altered. My pen reappeared with ink that wrote in reverse. A work glove came back inside out, with the stitching on the wrong side. My thermos returned filled with a liquid that looked like coffee, but tasted like iron filings and static electricity. I've started carrying backup items, spare flashlights, extra batteries, duplicate keys. The complex seems to prefer originals, leaving copies mostly untouched. This suggests intelligence, or at least preference, though I try not to think too hard about what that implies. Tonight, something feels different. The air pressure in box 7 drops whenever I approach, making my ears pop like I'm descending in an airplane. The concrete floor has developed new patterns, hairline fractures that form geometric shapes, almost like circuit boards etched into the foundation. When I shine my light at certain angles, they seem to pulse with a faint luminescence that disappears when I look directly at it. My radio crackles with static that sounds almost like language, not English, not any language I recognize, but structured nonetheless. Patterns within patterns. I've been recording these transmissions on my phone, though the files always corrupt when I try to transfer them. The phone itself disappeared for 6 hours last week, returning with a full battery despite being dead when it vanished. The photos in my gallery had been reorganized, sorted not by date, but by some other system I couldn't identify. Pictures of empty warehouses were grouped with images of my apartment. Screenshots of weather reports were filed with photos of my hands. I checked box 7 first, as always. The temperature differential hits me like walking into a freezer, though my breath barely shows. The concrete here feels different under my boots, softer somehow, like it's not quite solid. Objects left here overnight sink slightly into the floor, leaving impressions that last for days. I've measured some of these depressions, perfect circles, exactly 7.3 inches in diameter, regardless of the object's actual size. My flashlight flickers, though I replaced the batteries an hour ago. In the stuttering light, I catch movement in my peripheral vision. Not quite shadows, but distortions in the air itself, like heat mirages in reverse. They follow the geometric patterns in the floor, flowing through the fractures like current through wires. The radio on my belt disappears mid-step. I feel it there one moment, gone the next, the weight simply ceasing to exist. No sound, no sensation of it being pulled away, just absence where presence was. This is how it happens. Between heartbeats, between thoughts, in the spaces where attention briefly lapses. I know where it will appear. The complex has been teaching me its logic through repetition and loss. Box 12, on the roof. Still transmitting, but tuned to a frequency that doesn't exist on the dial. I'll find it there in exactly 93 minutes, covered in condensation that shouldn't form in this weather, playing static that sounds like breathing. The walk to box 12 takes me through the heart of the complex, past loading docks where puddles form without rain, and doorways that feel colder on the inside than the outside. The other guards who work days tell me nothing unusual happens during their shifts. The disappearances, the displacements, the alterations, they're reserved for the night, for the hours when the complex operates according to its other purpose. I've been researching the land's history. Before the warehouses, this was farmland. Before that, wetlands that the indigenous peoples avoided, claiming the ground here was hollow. Geological surveys from the 1960s noted unusual mineral deposits, crystalline structures that shouldn't form in this region's sediment. The reports were filed away, deemed irrelevant to commercial development. Box 9 hums with a subsonic vibration that I feel in my bones. Inside, forklifts are parked in rows, their keys removed and locked in the office. Yet sometimes, I find them in different positions come morning, their batteries drained despite being fully charged at shift's end. The floor here has more of those circuit-like patterns, converging on a spot near the eastern wall where the temperature drops another 5 degrees. I place my hand on that wall, and for a moment, I feel something like a pulse. Not quite electrical, not quite organic, but undeniably present. My palm comes away damp, though the wall appears dry. The moisture smells like ozone and copper, like the air before lightning strikes, like the taste of batteries on the tongue. My badge disappears from my belt. Unlike the radio, I feel this one go, a sensation like it's being pulled through the clip, through the fabric, through space itself. It'll return in 4 hours. I know this now. It'll be in my jacket pocket, soaking wet, smelling of that same copper electric scent. When I scan it tomorrow morning, the system will show I've been in areas of the complex that don't exist on any blueprint. The circuit is learning me the way I'm learning it. Each disappeared object is a probe, testing the boundaries of what I'll accept, what I'll rationalize, what I'll report. I stopped filing incident reports after the 3rd week. My supervisor's concerned looks were worse than the phenomena themselves. Box 12 looms ahead, its roof accessible via a rusted ladder that sings in the wind. I climb, knowing what I'll find but needing to confirm the pattern holds. The radio sits exactly where expected, in the center of the roof, crackling with that not-quite-language static. It's wet, though the night is dry. The moisture pools around it in a perfect circle, 7.3 inches in diameter. I pick it up, and for a moment, through the static, I hear something that might be my own voice, displaced in time, saying words I haven't spoken yet. Or maybe words I've already forgotten speaking. The complex makes it hard to distinguish between memory and premonition, between what's happened and what's happening. The city lights of Toledo spread out beyond the fence, normal and distant. People are sleeping in houses where objects stay where they're placed, where floors remain solid, where the only circuits are the ones carrying electricity through copper wires. They don't know about places like this, where the infrastructure has developed its own agenda, its own metabolism. My notebook reappears in box 3, filled with my handwriting but containing entries I didn't make. They describe patterns I haven't noticed yet, document disappearances that haven't happened yet. Or maybe they have happened, and I've forgotten. The complex does things to memory, makes it unreliable, makes me question the sequence of events. One entry, dated 3 days from now, describes finding my own body's impression in the concrete of box 7, as if I'd been lying there long enough to sink into the floor. Another entry, dated last month, mentions a room that doesn't exist. Box 0, located beneath the complex, accessible through the floor patterns when they align correctly. I've started leaving myself notes, not trusting my memory to remain stable within the complex's influence. Post-its on the security office walls, reminders on my phone, messages written on my arms in permanent marker. They help mostly, though sometimes I find notes I don't remember writing, in handwriting that's mine but different, like I'm corresponding with alternate versions of myself across the circuit. The temperature in box 7 continues to drop. I've measured it at -2 degrees Celsius now, impossible for a structure with no cooling system. Frost forms on the inside walls in patterns that mirror the fractures in the floor. When I trace these patterns with my flashlight, they seem to extend beyond the walls, suggesting a structure larger than the warehouse itself, existing in spaces that overlap but don't quite coincide with normal architecture. My watch stops at 3:33 a.m. It'll start again in exactly 7 minutes, showing the correct time as if it never stopped. This happens every night now, a regularity within the irregularity. During those 7 minutes, the complex feels different, more active, more present, like it's fully awake and aware. I find my badge in my jacket pocket, soaking wet as predicted. The water is body temperature, exactly 98.6 degrees, and it never seems to dry completely. I've started carrying plastic bags to protect my other belongings from the moisture that accompanies returned items. The circuit map I've been trying to construct shows connections that shouldn't exist, direct links between buildings separated by hundreds of meters, pathways that pass through solid earth, convergence points that occupy the same space simultaneously. It's not a map of physical infrastructure, but something else. Something that uses the warehouses as anchor points for a network that extends in directions we don't have words for. Last night, I found a tooth in box 14. Not human, too long, too curved, with roots that branched like tree roots. It was warm to the touch, and when I picked it up, I felt the circuits pulse through it, stronger and clearer than ever. I left it where I found it, but it followed me home, appearing in my bathroom sink, still warm, still pulsing with that not quite life. The other guards have started avoiding me. They say I smell like copper and static, that my presence makes their radios malfunction. They're not wrong. The circuit has marked me somehow, made me part of its redistribution network. Small objects disappear around me even outside the complex now. Pens, coins, keys. They return hours later, always wet, always in impossible locations. My apartment has developed cold spots, areas where the temperature drops without explanation. I found those same geometric patterns starting to form in the paint on my walls, faint but growing clearer each day. The complex is spreading, using me as a conduit to extend its reach beyond the 40 acres of industrial property. I should quit. I should walk away, find another job, move to another city. But I can't. The circuit won't let me, or I won't let myself. I can't tell the difference anymore. Each night I return to walk the rows, to document the disappearances, to feel the pulse through the walls and floors. I'm part of the pattern now, another object being moved through the network according to rules I'll never fully understand. Tonight, my flashlight reveals something new in box 7. The geometric patterns in the floor have aligned, forming a perfect spiral that descends through the concrete like a drain. But it's not draining anything. It's feeding something up. Something that makes the air shimmer and distort. Something that smells like copper and electricity and time itself dissolving. I lean closer and I see myself reflected in the spiral. Not just one reflection, but dozens, each slightly different, each from a slightly different angle of time. In some, I'm younger. In others, older. In one, I'm not there at all, just an empty uniform standing on its own. The radio crackles with that familiar static, and this time, I understand it's not language but location. Coordinates in the circuit's navigation system, marking points where reality wears thin enough for objects to slip through. The complex isn't just redistributing things, it's sampling them, learning their properties, incorporating them into something larger. My badge begins to glow with a soft phosphorescence, the same light I've been seeing in the floor patterns. When I hold it up, I can see through it, see the circuit's true structure overlaid on the physical world. A vast network of flowing energy that treats matter like data, moving it through channels that exist between spaces, storing it in locations that occupy no location. I understand now why objects return wet. They're not being submerged in water, but in something else. Something that exists in the spaces between molecules. Something that conducts the circuit's intentions through the physical world. The moisture is a residue of translation, evidence of passage through states we haven't discovered yet. The tooth appears in my hand without me reaching for it. It's no longer warm, but burning, almost too hot to hold. Through it, I feel the entire complex's awareness focus on me, recognizing me as either an intruder or an invitation. I can't tell which. The circuit doesn't distinguish between observer and observed, between guard and guarded. My radio disappears again, but this time, I disappear with it. For a moment that lasts no time and all time, I exist in the circuit's native state, dispersed across the network, experiencing every location simultaneously. I see the entire history of the complex, layers of time stacked like transparent sheets. I see other guards who've worked here, some from decades ago, still walking their rounds in parallel timelines that occasionally intersect with mine. Then I'm back, standing on the roof of Box 12, radio in hand, soaking wet despite the clear night. My clothes smell like copper and ozone. My watch shows 3:40 a.m., but my phone shows 5:15 a.m. Both are correct, depending on which timeline I'm choosing to observe. The notebook in my pocket has new entries, written in my handwriting, describing events I don't remember but know are true. They speak of Box 0, of the room beneath the complex where the circuit's core processes reality into something more fluid, more negotiable. They describe how to find it, how to access it through the aligned patterns in Box 7's floor, but they also warn against it. The entries, written by versions of me that have already been there, describe changes that can't be undone. Perception permanently altered, existence spread across multiple states simultaneously, consciousness distributed through the circuit like data through a network. I walk back to the security office, my footsteps echoing in ways that suggest more than one person walking. The screens show me in multiple locations at once, entering Box 3, leaving Box 9, standing still in Box 7. All of it is happening. All of it has happened. All of it will happen. The sun rises over Toledo, painting the warehouses in normal light that makes the night's experiences feel like dreams or delusions. The day shift arrives, and they see nothing unusual, just me, looking tired, smelling faintly of copper, clutching a notebook filled with incomprehensible diagrams. I clock out and drive home through streets that seem too solid, too permanent. In my apartment, I find my missing items arranged in a perfect spiral on my living room floor. Every pen, every key, every small object that's disappeared over the past 3 months. They're all dry now, no longer pulsing with that strange energy. Just ordinary things that have taken an extraordinary journey, but I know tonight I'll return. The circuit calls to me through the patterns forming in my walls, through the cold spots spreading across my floor, through the taste of copper that never quite leaves my tongue. I'm part of it now, or it's part of me, or we're part of something else that neither of us fully comprehends. The complex waits, patient and hungry, processing reality through its concrete circuits, teaching me through displacement and return that nothing is as permanent as we believe, that everything is just data waiting to be redistributed through channels we're only beginning to perceive. My badge glows softly in the darkness of my pocket, a beacon marking me as translated, as someone who's passed through the circuit and returned changed. Not damaged, not improved, just different. Aware of the spaces between spaces, the times between times, the vast network that uses our physical world as just one layer of its impossible infrastructure. Tomorrow night I'll check Box 7 first, as always. The temperature will be colder, the patterns will be clearer, and maybe, if the alignment is right, I'll find the entrance to Box 0, where the circuit's true purpose waits to be discovered or to discover me. The tooth sits on my nightstand, no longer burning but warm, always warm, like something alive but not quite living. Through it, I can feel the complex breathing, 40 acres of concrete and steel inhaling and exhaling in rhythms that predate the warehouses, predate the city, predate everything except the hollow ground itself. I close my eyes, but I can still see the circuit's light behind my eyelids. Geometric patterns flowing like blood through veins, like thoughts through neurons, like objects through space that isn't quite space. The disappearances aren't theft or malfunction, they're communication, the complex learning to speak through displacement, teaching me to understand through loss and return. My radio crackles from somewhere I can't locate, playing that static that sounds like language from a future where words work differently. I listen, and almost, understand what it's trying to tell me about what the complex really is, what it's becoming, what we're becoming together. But understanding, like everything else here, is subject to redistribution. By morning, I'll have forgotten half of what I've learned, only to remember it again tomorrow night, when I walk the rows and feel the pulse through the walls. The circuit keeps some knowledge in circulation, moving it through minds, like it moves objects through space, ensuring nothing stays in one place long enough to become certain. This is my life now, walking between states, guarding warehouses that guard something else, something that uses the industrial architecture as camouflage for processes we haven't invented words for yet. Each night brings new patterns, new disappearances, new returns. Each night, I sink a little deeper into the circuit's logic, trading human certainty for something more fluid, more interconnected, more aware of the spaces between what we call real. The complex spreads, one returned object at a time, one wet badge at a time, one transformed guard at a time. We're all part of the circuit now, whether we know it or not. Our possessions and perceptions subject to redistribution according to patterns that emerge from the hollow ground, from the crystalline structures that shouldn't exist, from the temperature differentials that make no sense. And somewhere, in box 0 or beyond it, something watches through the circuit, learning us the way we're learning it, preparing for a convergence that my future notebook entries only hint at, a moment when the invisible network becomes visible, when the displacement becomes placement, when we finally understand what we've been guarding all along. But that understanding, like everything else, will come at a cost measured in disappeared moments and returned memories, in wet badges and warm teeth, in the steady transformation of guards into something else, conductors in a circuit that runs through reality itself, keeping things in motion, preventing stasis, ensuring that nothing, not even comprehension, ever stays where we put it. The sun sets. My shift begins again. Box 7 waits, 2 degrees colder than yesterday, its patterns almost complete. Tonight maybe I'll find what I've been looking for, or it will find me. In the circuit, there's no difference. The complex breathes. I breathe with it. Together we redistribute reality, one small object at a time. Story 5. The first time I saw the silver car, I barely noticed it. Just another vehicle sliding into the parking garage at 2:47 a.m., headlights sweeping across concrete pillars before dying abruptly. I was waiting for the next ping on my phone. Denver's downtown was dead at this hour, but airport runs were good money. I'd found this garage 3 weeks into driving nights. 5 stories of empty concrete, abandoned by whatever office building it once served. The security cameras were dark, their recording lights long extinguished, perfect for waiting between rides. Level 3 became my spot. Close enough to street level for quick exits, high enough for decent cell signal. I'd park near pillar C3, lean back, and watch city lights blur through rain-streaked glass. That night, the silver car pulled in like it owned the place. No hesitation, no confused circling. It drove straight up with purpose, engine purring low. I watched it pass my level, heading toward 4 or 5. Then silence. My phone buzzed. Airport run. I forgot about the silver car, but it came back the next night. And the next. Always between 2:45 and 3 a.m. Always that confident ascent. Always those headlights dying after passing level 3. I started watching for it, tracking its arrival between rides. The car looked like a newer sedan, maybe European, though I could never make out the model in darkness. Windows tinted black, impossible to see through. After a week of this routine, curiosity got the better of me. One night, after the silver car made its climb, I walked up to level 4. The garage felt different there, colder somehow, though that made no sense. The air tasted stale, metallic. Level 4 was empty. I checked level 5. Also empty. The exit cameras on each level were positioned to catch every vehicle leaving. I'd checked them all when I first started using the garage, making sure they were truly dead. The silver car had to be up here somewhere, but it wasn't. I went back to my car, unsettled but trying to rationalize it. Maybe there was a hidden spot I'd missed. Maybe the driver had some arrangement with building management. Not my business. But then I found the puddles. They appeared overnight near pillar C3, right where I usually parked. Perfect circles of water, maybe 3 feet across, with no source. The ceiling above was bone dry. I checked with my phone's flashlight, running my hand along the concrete. No pipes, no cracks, no moisture at all. But every morning when I arrived for my shift, there they were. Fresh puddles that hadn't been there 6 hours earlier. The water had an odd quality. It didn't reflect light properly. The beam seemed to sink into the surface rather than bounce back. And it was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than it should have been in a freezing garage. I started parking one space over. The puddles began spreading. Not all at once, but gradually, night by night. They'd creep across the painted parking lines, following a path that made no sense. The water would flow uphill sometimes, defying gravity to climb the slight incline toward the ramp. Then came the tire tracks. I discovered them by accident, arriving earlier than usual one night when a ride canceled last minute. The puddles were still wet, still spreading, and through them ran fresh tire tracks. They led from the puddle directly up the ramp, water darkening the concrete in two parallel lines. I followed them. The tracks climbed the ramp in perfect alignment, never wavering, never showing any sign of the slight corrections a human driver would make. They continued up past level 4, past level 5, and then they went straight into the wall. Not up to the wall, into it. The tracks just continued as if the wall wasn't there, the wet marks disappearing into solid concrete. I pressed my hand against the spot where they vanished. The wall was vibrating, subtle but unmistakable, like there was an engine idling on the other side. The concrete felt warm, almost feverish. I yanked my hand back and stumbled away. That night I started getting complaints. 3 passengers mentioned it unprompted. A smell in my car like exhaust fumes, but sweeter, chemical. One woman asked if I'd had work done recently. A businessman kept rolling down the window, claiming dizziness. I couldn't smell anything. But after dropping off that businessman, I noticed my hands were shaking. Not from cold or exhaustion. They were trembling in rhythm with something I couldn't quite identify. I checked my car's exhaust system the next day. Nothing wrong. Had the oil changed, the filters replaced. The smell persisted. Only at night. Only after I'd been in the garage. The smart thing would have been to find a new waiting spot, but I needed to understand what was happening. The silver car, the puddles, the tracks that led through solid wall, they were connected somehow. They had to be. So I started recording. I positioned my phone on the dashboard, aimed at pillar C3, set to record from 2:30 to 3:30 a.m. The first few nights showed nothing, just the empty garage. But on the 4th night, something changed. At 2:58 a.m., the puddles began to form, not slowly seeping from somewhere, but materializing. The concrete darkened in perfect circles, water appearing from nowhere. Then, at 3 a.m. exactly, the silver car appeared in the frame. It hadn't driven up the ramp. It was simply there, parked 2 spaces over from my usual spot, engine running. The exhaust pipe was releasing something, but it wasn't normal exhaust. It was liquid, thick and dark, pooling beneath the car before spreading across the concrete. I was watching this video while parked in that same spot. I looked up from my phone to where the silver car should have been. The space was empty. I looked back at the phone. The car was there on the screen, clear as day, that dark liquid still pouring from its exhaust. I held up the phone, using it like a window. Through the screen, the silver car sat there, impossibly present. Without the phone, empty space. My hands were shaking worse now, that rhythmic trembling matching the vibration I'd felt in the wall. The car on the screen began to move. It pulled forward slowly, those same deliberate movements I'd observed before. It drove toward the ramp and I followed, keeping it centered in my phone's screen. Up past level 4, past level 5, and then it drove through the wall, not into, through. On my screen, there was no wall. The ramp continued, spiraling upward into levels that didn't exist. 6, 7, 8, floors that weren't there when I looked with my own eyes. The silver car climbed steadily, its red taillights growing smaller but never quite disappearing. I lowered the phone, and there was only the wall, raised it, and the impossible ramp stretched upward into darkness. A text notification popped up. Airport run. My hands moved automatically, accepting the ride. but my mind was fragmenting, trying to process what I was seeing. I drove to the pickup in a daze, the phone hot in my pocket like it had absorbed something from that footage. The passenger was a woman heading to catch a red-eye flight. She settled into the back seat, then immediately started coughing. God, what is that smell? She gasped between coughs. It's like burning plastic and antifreeze. I couldn't smell it, but in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was condensation on the inside of her window, and in that condensation, someone had drawn something. No, something was drawing itself. Lines appearing in the moisture, forming shapes. Tire tracks. They materialized slowly, 2 parallel lines running horizontally across the glass. Then, as I watched, they began to climb, defying logic, running up the window toward the roof of the car. The woman saw them too. She pressed herself against the opposite door, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The tracks continued forming, spreading across the rear windshield now, always climbing, always moving upward as if following an invisible ramp. I pulled over, told her there was an engine problem, called her another ride. She practically ran from my car. I sat there on the shoulder of I-70, watching those impossible tracks fade as the condensation evaporated. But I went back the next night. I had to. The garage felt occupied now, full. Like every empty space was actually filled with something I couldn't quite perceive. The air was thicker, harder to breathe. My footsteps echoed wrong, distorted, multiplied. At 2:55 a.m., I positioned myself at pillar C3 with my phone ready. The puddles formed on schedule. The silver car appeared on the screen. But this time, I saw something else. Other cars, dozens of them, all silver, all identical to the first. They filled every space on every level, engines idling in perfect synchronization. The vibration I'd felt in the wall was their collective idle. Hundreds of engines running behind concrete that was somehow both there and not there. And in each car, visible through windows that were clear on my phone's screen, sat drivers. They all had the same posture. Hands at 10 and 2, backs straight, heads facing forward. None of them moved, none of them blinked. They just sat there, waiting, while that dark liquid poured from every exhaust pipe, pooling and spreading across floors that existed in parallel to the ones I could see. I realized then that the smell my passengers complained about wasn't coming from my car. It was coming from me. I'd been breathing it in night after night, absorbing whatever those silver cars were releasing. It was inside me now, seeping from my pores, coating my lungs. I backed away from pillar C3, but on my phone screen I didn't move. The version of me on the screen stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly as if listening to something. As I watched, that other me walked toward the nearest silver car. The door opened for him. He got in, adjusted the mirror, placed his hands at 10 and 2. I ran, dropped my phone, left it there recording, and ran down the ramps to my car. But when I reached it, there was condensation on all the windows. The tracks were everywhere now, on the glass, on the hood, on the concrete around my vehicle. They all led upward, all pointing toward those invisible levels above. My car wouldn't start. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. The smell was overwhelming now, even to me. Exhaust and antifreeze and something else, something organic and wrong. I kept turning the key, pumping the gas, begging it to start. Then I heard it. Engines. Hundreds of them, revving in unison somewhere above me. The whole garage shook with the sound. Concrete dust drifting from the ceiling like snow. The puddles around my car began to bubble and spread. Warm water flowing upward against gravity, following those impossible tracks. My car finally started. I threw it in reverse, tires squealing against wet concrete. In the rear-view mirror, I saw them. Silver cars descending the ramp in a perfect line. Their headlights dark but somehow still visible, like shadows in reverse. I made it out. Burst through the garage exit onto the empty street, running a red light, not stopping until I was miles away. I pulled into a gas station, hands shaking. The attendant knocked on my window, looking concerned. When I rolled it down, he stepped back. "You okay, buddy? Your car's smoking bad." I looked back. Dark liquid was dripping from my exhaust pipe, pooling on the asphalt. The same liquid from the silver cars. It spread slowly, defying the slope of the parking lot, creeping upward toward the gas pumps. I abandoned my car there. Walked home in the freezing pre-dawn darkness, calling in sick to every ride I had scheduled. But when I got to my apartment, when I finally felt safe enough to check my jacket pocket, I found my phone. The one I'd dropped in the garage. It was still recording. The screen showed me sitting in my living room, watching myself on the phone. Behind me, visible through my apartment window on the screen but not in reality, was the parking garage. It towered impossibly high, dozens of floors that didn't exist stretching up into a dark sky. Every level was packed with silver cars, all of them facing outward, waiting. I've stopped driving nights, stopped driving altogether, but every morning at 3 a.m., I wake to the sound of engines idling outside my window. Exhaust seeps through the walls. Puddles form on my bathroom floor. Perfect circles of warm water that trail up the walls when I'm not looking. Sometimes I check my phone, holding it up like a window to that other space. I see myself in the silver car now, hands at 10 and 2, engine running. That version of me never moves, never blinks. Just sits there producing that dark liquid that spreads across dimensions I can't perceive without the screen. The other drivers, the ones who complained about the smell, they've started texting me. All of them, even though I never gave them my number. The messages are always the same. Level 6, space 43, engine running. I know what it means. There's a spot waiting for me since that first night I saw the silver car. All I have to do is go back to the garage, take the ramp up past the wall, and park where I'm supposed to be, where some part of me already is. The puddles in my bathroom are getting bigger. The tracks on my windows are permanent now, etched into the glass. And every night those engines get louder, closer. I think about that wall in the garage, how it vibrated with engines running behind it. I press my hand against my apartment wall sometimes and feel the same thing. That rhythmic idle of machines waiting for their drivers to return. The silver car wasn't entering the garage. It was exiting from somewhere else. Somewhere that overlaps with our world, but isn't quite part of it. And every night I spent there, breathing in those fumes, sitting in those puddles, I was being prepared. Converted. Made compatible with wherever those cars really come from. I've stopped looking at my phone, but I can't throw it away. Sometimes it rings. My own number calling itself. I never answer, but the voicemail is always the same. Just the sound of an engine idling, perfect and patient. The water climbs my walls at night, leaving tracks that spell out numbers. Coordinates, maybe. Or countdowns. I know I'll go back eventually. Not because I want to, but because part of me is already there, sitting in that silver car on level 6, space 43, engine running, producing the dark liquid that seeps between dimensions. The garage isn't abandoned. It never was. It's fuller than should be possible. Every space occupied by drivers who found it just like I did, who breathed in the fumes and saw the tracks that led through solid walls. We're all there, idling forever in spaces parallel to reality, visible only through screens that show too much. I can hear them now, even without the phone. Hundreds of engines in perfect synchronization, their exhaust creating puddles that appear in empty garages across the city. Spreading, one driver at a time, one breath of tainted air at a time. My hands have stopped shaking and started vibrating, matching that universal idle. When I look in the mirror, my reflection sometimes has its hands at 10 and 2, even when mine are at my sides. Level 6, space 43, engine running. The coordinates pulse behind my eyes. The taste of exhaust coats my throat. The puddles in my apartment form tire tracks that lead to my door, then through it, as if the door isn't there at all. Maybe it isn't. Maybe nothing is as solid as we think. Story 6. The first time I noticed the second set of boot prints, I convinced myself they belonged to another early morning photographer. Acadia in winter draws a particular breed of solitary soul. Those of us who prefer frost-covered granite to summer crowds, who find beauty in the way ice transforms familiar trails into alien landscapes. It made sense that someone else would be out here at dawn, following the same path through Jordan Pond's frozen shoreline. But they maintained a perfect distance, always 40, maybe 50 feet behind. When I stopped to adjust my camera settings or frame a shot of the bubbles reflected in patches of unfrozen water, the footsteps stopped too. When I moved on, they resumed. The precision of it gnawed at me. Not the casual wandering of another photographer, but something deliberate, measured. I'd been coming to Acadia for 3 winters now, documenting the park's transformation under snow and ice. My portfolio had grown thick with images of frozen waterfalls, frost-etched birches, and the way morning light turned Eagle Lake into molten silver. But this winter felt different from the moment I arrived. The usual ranger at the visitor center had been replaced by someone who barely looked up when I signed in. The few other winter hikers I encountered moved past without the typical nods of acknowledgement. Even the park itself seemed altered. Familiar trails branching in directions I didn't remember. Distances feeling stretched or compressed. On the 4th day of being followed, I tried an experiment. Instead of my planned route up Cadillac Mountain's South Ridge, I took a sharp left onto the Gorham Mountain Trail, moving fast through the knee-deep snow. The boot prints followed. I doubled back suddenly, expecting to catch a glimpse of my pursuer, but the trail behind me was empty. Just 2 sets of prints in the snow, mine heading out, and the others maintaining that same careful distance. That night, in my rented cabin near Bar Harbor, I studied my photographs from the day. In several shots, I could see the second set of prints in the background, always at the edge of the frame. But something was wrong with them. In one image taken near Thunderhole, the prints seemed to skip. 3 feet, then suddenly 10, as if the walker had taken an impossible stride. In another, near the Precipice Trail, they appeared to split briefly. 2 left boots side by side before merging back into a single track. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The boot pattern was familiar, a distinctive waffle sole with a diagonal cut across the heel. I looked down at my own boots drying by the door. The same pattern. Sleep came fitfully that night. I dreamed of walking endless loops through virgin snow, following my own footprints in circles that grew tighter with each revolution until I was spinning in place, the world blurring around me. I woke to find my boots moved, still by the door, but facing inward now, toes pointing at me like an accusation. The next morning brought fresh snow, 8 inches that should have erased all traces of previous travels. But when I reached the trailhead for the Beehive Loop, I found them again. My prints from yesterday, somehow preserved beneath the new snowfall, visible as depressions. And beside them, following them, the second set. I abandoned photography that day, focusing instead on the puzzle of my pursuer. I varied my pace, stopped randomly, backtracked, took unmarked paths through the woods. The prints followed every move, anticipated every turn. When I tried to set up an ambush near Bubble Pond, waiting behind a cluster of boulders with my camera ready, I found the following prints had somehow circled around, approaching from a different direction I hadn't taken. By the 7th day, the prints had begun to change. They no longer simply followed. They intersected with mine at impossible angles. I'd find places where the 2 sets crossed in X patterns, though I knew I'd walked straight through. Other spots showed the following prints walking backward alongside mine, heel to toe with my forward progress. In one disturbing section near Sand Beach, I found my own prints from that morning altered. Extra steps added between my strides, forming geometric patterns in the snow. The temperature dropped that afternoon, the kind of sudden plunge that turns breath into ice crystals before it leaves your mouth. I was photographing the frozen spray sculptures near Otter Cliff when I noticed the prints had formed something new. Arrows. My morning tracks had been edited, supplemented with additional steps that created clear directional markers pointing inland, away from the coast, toward the dense interior of the park where cell coverage disappeared. I followed them. What else could I do? Each arrow led to the next, a breadcrumb trail made of my own footsteps, rearranged by someone or something that understood my gait perfectly. The path led me off trail, through stands of pine so thick the canopy blocked the already dim winter light. My GPS showed me moving through areas that should have been impassable, elevation lines that didn't match the terrain I was crossing. The arrows led me in a wide arc that seemed designed to avoid the main trails, to keep me away from any chance encounters with other hikers. As the light began to fade, painting the snow purple-gray, I realized I was being herded. But toward what? I found it just as the last daylight died, a perfectly circular clearing, maybe 30 feet across. The snow here was pristine, untouched, so smooth it looked like a frozen pond. My footprints stopped at the edge, and so did the ones that had been following me. They all stopped, as if both sets of tracks had been walking toward this place from opposite directions, meeting here at this threshold. In the center of the clearing, the snow was disturbed in only one spot. A clear handprint, palm facing upward, fingers spread. But the print was wrong. It wasn't pressed down into the snow but seemed to rise from beneath, as if someone buried below had reached up, their hand melting through the surface just enough to leave a wet impression before withdrawing. I approached slowly, my boots breaking the perfect surface. The handprint was human in shape but too large, the fingers too long, the palm too wide. Water pooled in its depressions despite the below-freezing temperature, never quite turning to ice. I knelt beside it, pulled off my glove, and held my hand above it, comparing size. The water in the palm print began to move, swirling in patterns that reminded me of fingerprints in negative space. I found myself leaning closer, my hand descending toward it without conscious thought. The water was warm. I could feel heat rising from it, steam that didn't quite form, a humid breath in the frozen air. My fingers were inches from touching the water when I saw the reflection in it. Not my face looking down, but my face looking up, as if I were beneath the snow, drowning in white, reaching desperately toward the surface. The reflected me was screaming silently, eyes wide with a terror I didn't feel. I jerked back, stumbled, fell. When I looked again, the handprint was gone. The snow where it had been was smooth, untouched, as if I had imagined it. But my knees had left deep impressions where I'd knelt, and in those impressions, water was beginning to pool. I ran, crashed through the woods in growing darkness, branches tearing at my jacket, my camera bag banging against my hip. I no longer cared about following trails or maintaining direction. I needed to get away from that clearing, from the impossible handprint, from whatever was beginning to surface through the snow. I found my car by pure luck or instinct, keys shaking as I started the engine. The heater couldn't warm me during the drive back to Bar Harbor. I packed that night, left before dawn, drove straight through to Boston without stopping. But I've been home for a week now, and things aren't right. My apartment feels shifted, furniture in slightly wrong positions. My developed photographs from Acadia show scenes I don't remember shooting. Empty clearings filled with handprints, all facing upward, all wet despite the frozen ground. And when it snowed here yesterday, I looked out my window to see footprints in the courtyard below. 2 sets walking side by side. One matches my boots. The other set walks backward, maintaining perfect pace. This morning I found a wet handprint on my bathroom mirror, too large to be mine, facing outward as if pressed from the other side of the glass. The condensation won't wipe away. When I breathe on it, letters appear in the fog. Coordinates. They point to a place deep in Acadia's interior, a spot that doesn't appear on any trail map. I know I shouldn't go back. I know whatever left those prints, whatever edited my footsteps into arrows, whatever reached up through the snow, it's waiting for me. But I also know that the footprints outside my apartment are getting closer each night. The backward walker is patient, but not infinitely so. Tomorrow I'll return to Acadia. I'll follow those coordinates to whatever clearing or cave or impossible space they mark. Because the truth I've been avoiding since that night is simple. I never actually left the clearing. Some part of me is still there, kneeling in the snow, hand hovering over that wet print, forever about to make contact. The me that drove home, that's been living this past week. I'm the reflection from the water, I'm what looked back. And the real me, the one still frozen in that moment of almost touching, he needs to complete the gesture. He needs to reach down into the warm water and pull out whatever is waiting beneath. When I do, when we finally touch palm to palm through that impossible surface, I'll understand why the footprints follow, why they walk backward, why they know my gait so perfectly. I'll understand why the snow never quite covers them, why the water never quite freezes, why the handprint faces upward like an invitation or a warning or both. The forecast shows heavy snow for Acadia this weekend. Perfect conditions for photography. Perfect conditions for disappearing. I've charged my camera batteries and cleaned my lenses, though I suspect I won't be taking any pictures. Whatever happens in that clearing, whatever exchange takes place through the melted snow, it isn't meant to be documented. I leave this account here as evidence or explanation or apology. If someone finds it, know that the footprints you see in winter might not all belong to the living. Know that sometimes we follow ourselves in circles that exist outside of normal space. Know that when you find a handprint in the snow, wet and warm and impossible, you should never, ever reach back. But you will, just as I must, because that's what the followed do. We complete the circuit, close the loop, reach through the reflection to grasp whatever waits beneath. The snow is falling now. Time to go. Story 7. In the first knock came at 11:47 p.m. 3 soft taps against the shared wall, deliberate and measured. Then silence. A silence so complete it seemed to swallow the hum of the struggling air conditioner and the distant wheeze of trucks on Interstate 40. I sat up in the sagging bed of the Desert Palm Motel, my sales reports scattered across the faded floral comforter, waiting. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting my shadow in duplicate against the wood paneling. Nothing. I'd been on the road for 6 days, working my way through the Southwest Territory, hawking industrial cleaning supplies to restaurants and hotels. The Desert Palm was the kind of place you only stopped at when everything else was full or your expense account had run dry. Mine had done both. The neon sign out front advertised color TV and air condition, like they were still selling points worth mentioning. Half the letters didn't light up anymore. I returned to my paperwork, trying to calculate commissions on the calculator app of my phone. The numbers blurred together. Too many days of the same motels, the same pitches, the same rejection. My cigarette lighter sat on the nightstand next to my wallet and keys, arranged in the precise order I always kept them. A traveling salesman develops rituals. They're the only constants when home becomes a series of identical rooms. At 12:47 a.m., the knocks returned. 3 taps, same rhythm, same pause after. This time I pressed my ear against the wall. The surface felt oddly warm, almost humid, like breath against cold glass. I could hear nothing from the other side. No television murmur, no snoring, no toilet flush. Just my own pulse thundering in my ears. The manager had been specific when I checked in. A gaunt man with tobacco-stained fingers and eyes that never quite met mine. He'd handed me the key to room 12 with something approaching relief. Said I was his only guest tonight, business being what it was. The economy, he'd muttered, though the motel looked like it had been dying long before any recession. I knocked back. 3 times matching the pattern. Silence. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of water dripping in reverse, upward into faucets that shouldn't exist. When I woke at 6 a.m., my cigarette lighter had moved. Not far, just from the nightstand to the bathroom counter, it sat there, centered perfectly on a small puddle of water, droplets still beating on its metal surface like it had been recently washed. I hadn't been in the bathroom since before bed. The rational part of my brain, the part that had to function to make sales and navigate unfamiliar cities, offered explanations. Sleepwalking, maybe. Stress from the road. Too many gas station burritos and too much bad coffee. But my hands shook as I picked up the lighter, and the tremor had nothing to do with caffeine withdrawal. The day passed in a blur of failed pitches. The restaurant owners and Flagstaff weren't interested, claimed they had suppliers they'd worked with for years. The hotel manager took my card, but I could see it heading for the trash before I'd even left the lobby. By the time I returned to the Desert Palm, the sun was setting. painting the desert in shades of dried blood. The manager was still at his post, hadn't seemed to move at all. When I asked about the room next to mine, room 11, his jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Empty, he said, not looking up from a crossword puzzle that looked older than the motel itself. Been empty for months. I heard knocking last night, on the wall. His pen stopped moving. Pipes, he said. Old building. Pipes knock sometimes. But pipes didn't knock in patterns. Pipes didn't pause, then repeat. That night, I was ready. I'd arranged my belongings carefully. Wallet, keys, lighter on the nightstand, phone charging on the desk, my sample case locked and positioned against the door. If anything moved, I'd know. The knocking started earlier this time, 10:47 p.m. 3 taps, pause. I didn't respond, just watched the wall like it might reveal something. At 11:47, they came again. This time I noticed something else. A smell. Faint but unmistakable. Soap. Not the harsh industrial kind the motel provided, but something familiar, something specific. My soap. The artisanal cedar and sage bar my ex had gotten me started on. The one luxury I allowed myself on the road. It was sitting in my bathroom, I was sure of it, but the smell was coming from the wall, from the other side. I stood, pressed both palms against the paneling. It was warm again, warmer than before, and I swear I could feel a pulse beneath the surface. Not mechanical, not pipes expanding with hot water, but something organic, something waiting. The knocks came again at 12:47, and this time my keys were gone. I tore the room apart, checked under the bed, behind the television, in every drawer. They were nowhere. Then I heard it, the distinctive jingle of my keychain, a small compass my daughter had given me, coming from the bathroom. There they were, sitting in the sink, wet, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light. Water droplets covered them like they'd been carefully, methodically washed. I grabbed my phone to call. Who? The police? To report that my belongings were being mysteriously cleaned? The manager? Who clearly knew more than he was saying but would offer nothing but lies about pipes? Instead, I opened my laptop and searched for information about the Desert Palm Motel. Found old reviews, mostly complaints about the smell and the stains. But buried in a travel forum from 3 years ago, I found something that made my skin crawl. A woman had stayed in room 12. She'd reported the same knocking pattern, the same objects moving, always ending up in the bathroom, always wet. She'd demanded a room change, been moved to room 8. The forum post ended with her saying she'd found her own hairbrush, the one she'd been using for 15 years, with her specific hair still tangled in it, sealed inside the toilet tank of the new room, like it had been installed there, waiting for her. The knocking started again, but it wasn't 1:47, it was 1:23. The pattern was changing, or I was losing track of time. 3 knocks, but the pause was shorter. Impatient. I stood in the center of the room, watching my belongings, waiting for them to move. The air felt thick, pressing against my eardrums. Every surface in the room seemed to gleam with a thin film of moisture, though the desert air outside was bone dry. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked wrong, not distorted exactly, but like it was a half second behind my movements. Then I heard it, not knocking this time, but running water. From the other side of the wall, the sound of a bathtub filling. I pressed my ear to the wall again, and this time I heard more. Splashing. The specific sound of hands being washed, that particular rhythm of lathering soap. Then, and this is what made me pull away, humming. Low, tuneless, but unmistakably human, or something trying to be human. My sample case was moving, not dramatically, not sliding across the floor like something from a movie, just small shifts, maybe an inch at a time, toward the bathroom. I watched it, transfixed, as it made its slow journey across the worn carpet. When it reached the bathroom threshold, it stopped. I approached carefully, as if it might suddenly spring to life. Inside the bathroom, the sink was full of water, not running. The faucet was off, but full to the brim. And floating in it were things that shouldn't be there. My business cards fanned out like dead fish. My sample bottles, uncapped, their contents creating an oily rainbow on the surface. And at the bottom, barely visible through the murky water, something that looked like my soap bar. But it was wrong. Too large. Like multiple bars had been pressed together into one impossible mass. The knocking came again. Not from the wall this time, but from under the floor. 3 taps, right beneath where I stood. The pause. Then 3 more. The pattern was calling to me, or calling to something. I ran, grabbed my phone and car keys, still wet, always wet now, and fled the room. The manager wasn't at his desk. The lobby was dark except for the vending machine glow. I hammered the bell until he emerged from a back room, looking even more hollow than before. "I need a different room," I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "Something's wrong with room 12. He studied me for a long moment, then reached behind him without looking, pulled a key from the pegboard. "Room 8. "No charge for the inconvenience," he said, and his smile was all teeth and no warmth. Room 8 was on the other side of the motel, facing the highway instead of the desert. It looked identical to room 12. Same furniture, same arrangement, same stale smell of cigarettes and disappointment. I dropped my belongings on the bed and went straight to the bathroom. The toilet tank lid was slightly askew. My hands trembled as I lifted it. The mechanism inside looked normal, float, chain, flapper valve. But wedged behind the overflow tube was something wrapped in plastic. I pulled it free, water sloshing onto the floor. Inside the plastic was a bar of soap, cedar and sage. My brand, my specific type. But I'd never opened this one. The wrapper was intact, pristine, like it had just come from the store. Except for one detail that made my knees buckle. There were indentations in the bar. Finger marks. The exact pattern of my grip. The way I held it every morning in the shower. The unique wear pattern that only my hands could make. As if something had been studying me, learning me, preparing this offering, installing it. I sat on the bathroom floor, holding this impossible soap, as water dripped from the tank onto my hands. The water was warm, too warm for a toilet tank. Body temperature. From somewhere, the walls, the pipes, the space between spaces, came 3 soft knocks. A pause, then 3 more. Then a new sound, the squeak of a faucet turning. But not in my room. In all the rooms, a chorus of running water, of things being washed, being prepared. I understood then, with the clarity that comes from accepting the impossible. This wasn't about the motel. The motel was just the current location. Whatever was doing this, washing my things, learning my patterns, installing pieces of my life in places they shouldn't be, it had been following me. How many motels had I stayed in? How many rooms? How many times had I dismissed a misplaced item as forgetfulness? The knocking came again, louder now, from every wall, not demanding entry, confirming installation. I'm still in room 8. It's 3:47 a.m. as I write this on my phone, sitting in my car in the parking lot, engine running. I can see my reflection in the rearview mirror, and I look exactly like myself. Exactly. Too exactly. Like something studied me and got every detail right but doesn't understand why those details matter. The soap is still in my pocket. I can't bring myself to throw it away. It smells like me, like my specific chemistry mixed with cedar and sage, like proof that something has been collecting me, piece by piece, drop by drop. Tomorrow I'll drive to the next town, check into another motel. I'll arrange my belongings in the same order. It's my ritual, my constant. And I'll wait for the knocking. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Because now I understand what the pause is for. It's not waiting for a response. It's making room for the next installation. The Desert Palm Motel shrinks in my rearview mirror, but I can still smell cedar and sage. My hands on the steering wheel are clean, too clean, like they've just been washed. Like something else washed them for me, through me, as me. 3 exits to the next town, 3 taps on the wheel as I drive. Pause. The installation continues. Story 8. The first thing they don't tell you about old theaters is that they breathe. Not metaphorically. I mean the actual sound of air moving through spaces that shouldn't exist, like the building itself is drawing breath through lungs made of brick and timber. I learned this 3 weeks into my contract at the Orpheum, when I first heard the basement exhale. I'd been hired as the lighting tech for the grand reopening. 40 years the place had been shuttered, and now some investment group wanted to restore it to its former glory. The pay was good enough that I didn't ask questions about why the previous tech had quit after just 2 days, leaving only a note that said, "The angles are wrong." I figured he meant the lighting angles. I was wrong. The Orpheum sat on the corner of 7th and Main like a forgotten mausoleum, its Art Deco facade crumbling behind scaffolding. Inside, the main auditorium retained hints of its 1920s grandeur. Gilt moldings, velvet seats gone threadbare, a ceiling painted with constellations that had faded to the color of old tea. But it was the basement that concerned me. That's where all the electrical panels lived, where the old carbon arc follow spots had been stored, where I'd need to run new cable for the LED system. The blueprints showed a simple layout: storage rooms, the old coal cellar converted to electrical, and a few dressing rooms from when the orchestra pit could be lowered to create understage space for quick changes. Clean, logical, boring. The reality was different. I discovered the first impossible corridor on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been following what should have been a straight path from the electrical room to the old wardrobe storage when the hallway curved. Not dramatically, just a subtle arc that shouldn't have been there. The fluorescent work lights I'd strung up buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sick, greenish pallor that makes your skin look dead. I checked my phone's compass app. North stayed north, but the corridor kept bending. At first, I thought I'd simply misread the plans. Old buildings settle, walls get moved, renovations happen off record. But when I turned around to go back, the curve led me to the main corridor again. The same main corridor I'd started from, even though I'd never made a complete turn. The geometry didn't work. Couldn't work. The dust was thick down there, decades of it layered like geological strata. My footprints were clear in it, size 11 work boots making sharp impressions. But there were other marks too, footprints that seemed to follow mine, step for step, but the dust in them was already dry and settled, as if they'd been made days ago. They were always one stride ahead of wherever I went, like someone was walking backward in front of me, perfectly matching my pace. I started mapping the corridors, using spray paint to mark the walls, orange arrows pointing back toward the stairs, numbers to identify each turn. It didn't help. The passages rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking, or maybe they stayed the same and I was the one being rearranged. Either way, I'd follow my own arrows and end up somewhere impossible, staring at a number I'd sprayed on a completely different wall. The wardrobe storage room became my fixation. According to the blueprints, it should have been a large space near the northwest corner of the basement. I could never find the northwest corner. Every path I took led me back to the main corridor, or to other storage rooms filled with moldering scripts and broken stage machinery, but never to wardrobe storage. Yet I could smell it. Naphthalina, mothballs, that sharp chemical tang that gets in your nose and stays there. The smell grew stronger near certain walls, like it was seeping through from somewhere just beyond. My flashlight started dying near those walls. Not gradually, the batteries would just drain in seconds, LEDs fading from brilliant white to amber to nothing. I started carrying extras, but it didn't matter. The darkness down there was hungry. 3 weeks in, I heard the whispers. They started when I was alone, running cable through the spaces between walls. Just syllables at first, too soft to make out, like someone talking in the next room with their mouth pressed against the wallpaper. I'd stop, hold my breath, strain to listen. Nothing. But the moment I went back to work, there they were again, urgent and unintelligible, growing louder when I got close to certain spots, always near where the mothball smell was strongest. I tried recording them with my phone. The playback gave me nothing but static and my own breathing, though I swear I could see my breath misting in the camera footage, even though the basement was warm, stuffy even. The timestamp on the videos was wrong too. I'd record for 5 minutes and the file would show 30 seconds. Or I'd record for 10 seconds and get an hour of footage. An hour of me standing perfectly still, staring at something just outside the frame while my breath came in rapid, shallow gasps I didn't remember taking. The break-in happened on a Thursday, or at least that's what the security company called it. I'd locked up the night before, set the alarm, driven home to my apartment across town. But when I arrived the next morning, my personal toolbox was in the basement, moved from the truck where I always kept it. The lock wasn't broken, the alarm hadn't triggered. But there it was, sitting in the middle of the main corridor, tools arranged neatly beside it like someone had been taking inventory. That's when I found the first note, tucked under my wire strippers. The coat room remembers. I knew I should quit. Pack up, walk out, let someone else deal with whatever was happening in that basement. But the money was too good. And more than that, I needed to understand. The impossibility of it gnawed at me. Buildings don't reshape themselves. Footprints don't appear ahead of you. Whispers don't come from inside walls. I started staying later, bringing camping gear so I could spend whole nights in the basement. I set up motion sensors, infrared cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, borrowed from a friend who investigated hauntings for a living. He'd laughed when I asked for them, said the Orpheum was famous in certain circles. That place has been eating people since the 1940s, he'd said, still chuckling. Not literally, mind you. They just go in normal and come out different, if they come out at all. The equipment showed me nothing conclusive. Temperature readings that didn't match what my skin felt. Magnetic anomalies that moved like someone pacing. The infrared showed heat signatures in rooms I knew were empty. Human-shaped but too tall, too thin, joints bending in too many places. But when I'd checked the rooms, there was never anything there except the smell of mothballs growing stronger. I finally found the wardrobe storage on my 31st night in the basement. I wasn't even looking for it. I'd been following new cable runs, checking connections. When I turned a corner I'd turned 100 times before, and there it was. A heavy wooden door with a brass nameplate that read, "Wardrobe and Costumes," in that elaborate 1920s script. The room beyond was vast, far larger than the blueprint suggested. Racks of costumes stretched back into darkness, organized by era, by production, by some system I couldn't parse. The mothball smell was overwhelming, sharp enough to make my eyes water, but it was the movement that stopped my breath. Every rack was turning, slowly, hangers swaying like pendulums. They'd rotate a few degrees, pause, continue, all of them synchronized in a pattern that hurt to follow with my eyes. As I watched, they all stopped at once, every hanger on every rack pointing toward a single costume rack near the back. The silence was complete. Even the omnipresent hum of the building's electricity had stopped. I walked toward the indicated rack, my footsteps impossibly loud on the concrete floor. Each step echoed wrong, coming back to me from directions that shouldn't exist. The rack held period costumes, 1940s by the look of them, men's suits, military uniforms, evening wear. But there was a gap, an empty space where something heavy had hung. The wooden bar was still indented from the weight, and there were a few threads caught on the metal hanger, dark wool, quality fabric. An overcoat, maybe. That's when I noticed the label on the empty hanger, written in fountain pen on a yellowed card. Mr. Henderson, understage, 1943. My name is Henderson. I never told anyone at the theater my last name. I was just the lighting tech, paid under the table, no paperwork. But there it was, in ink that looked fresh despite the aged paper. The whispers started again, louder now, resolving into words I could almost understand. They seemed to come from inside the costumes themselves, as if the fabric was speaking. I leaned closer, straining to hear, and finally made out a single phrase, repeated over and over. You're wearing it now. You're wearing it now. You're wearing it now. I looked down at myself, at my work clothes, my jeans and flannel shirt. But in the dim light, just for a moment, I saw something else. A dark wool overcoat, heavy and well-made, the kind they wore in the 1940s. The kind that would leave an indent on a wooden bar if it hung there for decades. I ran, stumbled through the darkness, followed my spray-painted arrows that now all pointed in different directions, crashed through passages that folded in on themselves. Somehow I found the stairs, burst out into the lobby where the morning sun was streaming through the restored stained glass. The security guard looked at me strangely, but didn't say anything. In my truck, I checked myself in the mirror. No overcoat, just my normal clothes, though they smelled strongly of mothballs. But when I got home, when I went to hang up my jacket in the closet, there it was. A dark wool overcoat, 1940s style, hanging in my apartment like it had always been there. No label, no explanation, just the coat. I went back the next day. I had to. The work wasn't finished. But when I descended to the basement, the wardrobe storage door was gone. Just blank wall where it had been, my spray paint arrows pointing at nothing. The blueprint still showed it should be there, but the building had decided otherwise. The footprints still appear ahead of me when I work down there. The whispers continue, though now I understand them better. They're not threatening exactly. They're inviting. They want me to understand something about the geometry of the place, about how a building can fold time the same way it folds space, how 40 years of closure might be no time at all, or all time simultaneously. I found another note yesterday, slipped under my toolbox again. The understage remembers what the main stage forgets. There's a photo in the lobby I hadn't noticed before, dated 1943. It shows the theater's technical crew standing in front of the building. There's a man in the back row, partially obscured, wearing a dark overcoat. The resolution is too low to make out his face clearly, but he's standing exactly where I park my truck. The caption lists names I don't recognize, except for one, T. Henderson, lighting design. My first initial is T. I've tried to research this other Henderson, but the records from that era are incomplete. The theater's archives were damaged in a flood, they say, though the basement shows no signs of water damage. What I did find was a single newspaper clipping from November 1943. Technical director disappears during production. The article is brief, mentions that Henderson vanished during a dress rehearsal, leaving behind only his overcoat in the understage changing area. The show went on. It always does. The reopening is next week. The investors are pleased with my work. The new LED system is beautiful, they say, though I don't remember installing half of it. There are circuits in the basement I have no memory of wiring, but they work perfectly. My signature is on the inspection forms. I still go down to the basement every day. I have to. There's always something that needs adjusting, some cable that needs running through those impossible corridors. The footprints still precede me, but now I recognize the tread pattern. It's from a style of work boot they don't make anymore, the kind they wore in the 1940s, the kind I've started seeing in vintage store windows, feeling drawn to purchase. The overcoat hangs in my apartment, and I've caught myself reaching for it on cold mornings. It fits perfectly, as if it was tailored for me, or I was tailored for it. When I wear it, the basement corridors make more sense. The angles that seemed wrong become right. The whispers become conversations I almost remember having. There's a soft opening tomorrow, a dress rehearsal before the grand reopening. I'll be in the lighting booth, calling cues I know by heart, though I've never run this show. The investors will sit in the restored velvet seats, and the ghost light will be extinguished for the first time in 40 years. I know what happens next. The other Henderson knew too. That's why he left the coat. Not as a warning, but as an invitation. The building needs a lighting technician, has always needed one, will always need one. Time folds differently in the understage. 1943 and 2024 are just different angles of the same corner, different curves in the same impossible corridor. I've started leaving notes for the next one. Little hints tucked into the blueprints, markers on the walls that will fade and reappear as needed, because someone has to tend the lights. Someone has to walk those corridors. Someone has to wear the coat. The theater breathes, and I breathe with it now. In and out, in and out. In the darkness between the walls where all times exist at once, and the footprints always lead back to the beginning. Tomorrow's dress rehearsal went perfectly. Yesterday's grand reopening was a success. Today I am installing lights that have always been here, following footprints I haven't made yet, wearing a coat that remembers everything the building wants to forget. The angles aren't wrong. I was. Story 9. The floorboards in my rented room have memorized every creak, every groan that echoes through this century-old house near campus. I've been here 3 weeks now, and I know them all, except for the ones that come at 3:47 a.m. Every night, without fail, someone descends the stairs with deliberate slowness. The rhythm never varies. Step, pause, as if whoever it is carries something heavy or moves with infinite caution. The first night, I assumed it was another tenant heading to the kitchen for water. The second night, I thought perhaps someone worked an early shift. By the fifth night, when I finally asked my housemates about it during our rare gathering in the common area, each one looked at me with the same bewildered expression. "I sleep like the dead," the med student said, dark circles permanently etched beneath her eyes. "Haven't heard anything." The others nodded in agreement, their denials carrying an edge of annoyance, as if I'd accused them of something improper. After that, I stopped asking. The house itself seems to breathe at night. Built in 1924, according to the faded cornerstone, it leans slightly eastward, causing doors to drift open if not properly latched. The landlord, a woman who communicates exclusively through terse text messages, had mentioned this quirk when I signed the lease. What she hadn't mentioned was the way shadows pooled in corners regardless of the light source, or how the air in certain spots felt thick, almost viscous, like walking through invisible curtains. My room occupies the third floor's southwest corner, a converted attic space with slanted ceilings, and a single dormer window overlooking the backyard. The stairs leading down are narrow, built for people of a different era, and they protest under any weight over 100 pounds. This makes the nightly descent all the more puzzling. Whoever walks them must be extraordinarily light, yet the sound carries with surprising clarity through the old wood and plaster. Last Tuesday, driven by a combination of sleep deprivation and mounting frustration, I decided to set a trap. Not a harmful one, just something to prove I wasn't imagining things. I scattered flour across the third step from the bottom, a thin, even layer that would capture any footprint. If someone was sneaking around at night, I'd have evidence. At 3:47 a.m., the footsteps began their descent. I lay rigid in my bed, counting each footfall, waiting for the telltale sound of flour being disturbed. The walker reached the bottom. I heard the final step onto the ground floor, and then silence. I forced myself to wait until dawn before investigating. The flour remained, but it had been marked. Thin impressions crossed the powder, delicate and wet-looking, as if someone had walked through it wearing soaked socks. The prints were small, almost child-sized, though I'd been assured no children lived in the house. More disturbing was the pattern. The footprints faced upward, toward my floor, not down as they should have if someone had descended. I photographed the evidence with shaking hands, but when I reviewed the images later, they showed only unmarked flour. The prints I'd seen so clearly had vanished, or perhaps had never translated through the camera's lens. Technology, I'm learning, doesn't always capture what the eye perceives in this house. The internal clothesline runs through what used to be a servant's corridor, a narrow passage between the kitchen and the back stairs. We share it for drying delicates and winter clothes that can't handle the basement's ancient dryer. Yesterday, I discovered my shirts twisted into knots. Not random tangles, but deliberate, simple knots, each one identical. The most unsettling detail. Every knot pointed the same direction, toward the basement door at the corridor's end. I untied them methodically, my fingers working through each twist while my skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. The fabric felt damp in places, though it had been hanging for 2 days. A smell clung to the material. Not quite mildew, not quite decay, but something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The electrical panel lives in the pantry, a closet-sized room off the kitchen that smells perpetually of old potatoes and dust. Most of the breakers are labeled in fading pencil. Kitchen, second floor east, basement. One label caught my attention the first week, extra room. I'd mapped every inch of this house by then, driven by a need to understand my new space. There was no extra room. Yet 3 times now, I've heard the distinctive snap of a breaker tripping, followed immediately by its reset. Always the same one. always lasting exactly 3 seconds. I've taken to sitting in the kitchen some nights, watching the panel, waiting to catch the phenomenon in action. Last night, I succeeded. At 2:15 a.m., the extra room breaker flipped up with a sharp click. The kitchen's overhead light flickered, though it's on a different circuit entirely, and for those 3 seconds, I heard something that made my stomach clench. The sound of a door opening somewhere below, though the basement door remained firmly closed in front of me. The breaker fell back with another click, and silence returned, thick and oppressive. I've started mapping the house obsessively, measuring rooms, calculating square footage. The numbers don't add up. There's space unaccounted for, particularly in the basement's northeast corner, where the foundation wall seems to extend beyond the interior partition. When I mentioned this to the med student, she gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Pity mixed with something else, maybe fear. "Don't go looking for things that don't want to be found," she said, then immediately laughed as if she'd made a joke. But her hands shook as she poured her coffee, and she hasn't made eye contact with me since. The dream started 2 nights ago. In them, I descend the stairs at 3:47 a.m., my feet moving without my consent. I'm searching for something, or maybe something is pulling me down. The basement door stands open, though I know I locked it. Beyond the threshold, darkness moves like a living thing, and I can hear breathing that isn't mine. I wake just as I'm about to cross into that black space, my sheets soaked with sweat that smells like that wrong, organic scent from my knotted clothes. During my waking hours, I've noticed things shifting in my peripheral vision, shadows that linger a beat too long after I turn on a light, reflections in windows that don't quite match my movements. The house watches me now. I'm certain of it. Or something in the house watches. Something that knows I've been asking questions, setting traps, trying to document its presence. The other tenants have grown distant. They avoid common areas when they hear me coming, conduct hushed conversations that cease when I appear. Are they protecting me from something, or protecting something from me? The distinction matters less each day as the boundaries between paranoia and perception blur. I found a receipt yesterday, wedged between 2 floorboards in my room. The paper was yellowed, brittle, dated 1987. It was for construction materials, concrete, rebar, waterproofing compound. The quantity suggested a significant project, perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet. The dimensions of a small room. At the bottom, in handwriting that matched the electrical panel labels, someone had written, "Sealed as requested. God forgive us." My research into the house's history yields frustratingly little. Public records show a gap between 1987 and 1991, when no one officially lived here. The university's archives mention it only in passing, a property near campus, nothing more. But I found one thing, a single line in a 1988 campus newspaper police blotter. Noise complaint at 1247 Elmwood resolved. Residents claimed sounds coming from unoccupied house. This house, my house. The footsteps have changed. They no longer just descend at 3:47 a.m. Now they pause outside my door, and I can hear breathing, wet, labored, as if through waterlogged lungs. Sometimes I hear fingernails dragging along the wood, spelling out patterns I don't want to understand. The flour I scattered has appeared in my room, formed into symbols that hurt to look at directly. When I try to photograph them, my phone dies, though the battery shows full when it restarts. I've stopped sleeping. Instead, I sit with my back to the corner, watching my door, listening to the house's nighttime symphony. The extra room breaker flips more frequently now, sometimes staying on for minutes instead of seconds. During those extended periods, I hear things that shouldn't exist. Furniture being dragged across a floor that isn't there, water dripping in spaces between the walls, whispers in a language that predates words. The med student left a note under my door this morning. Just 4 words. Stop looking. It knows. But I can't stop. The house has shown me too much. Or perhaps I've seen too little. The truth lurks just beyond my perception. In that space unaccounted for. In that room that doesn't exist, but draws power nonetheless. Tonight, I plan to follow the footsteps. When they begin their descent at 3:47 a.m., I'll slip out behind them, track them to their source. The basement door will be open. I know this with certainty that bypasses logic. Whatever waits down there, whatever has been sealed since 1987, wants to be found. Or perhaps it wants to find me. The distinction, I'm learning, matters less than I thought. The clothes on the line have knotted themselves again. This time they've formed letters, COME. The message is clear, the invitation explicit. The house has been preparing me, showing me signs, testing my resolve. Every creaking board, every impossible footprint, every flicker of that paradoxical breaker has been leading to this moment. I can hear movement below as I write this. Not footsteps, but something else. A rhythmic scraping, like fingernails on concrete, like something trying to claw its way up or out. The sound reverberates through the walls, through the floors, through my bones. It's 3:44 a.m. 3 minutes until the nightly ritual begins. My hands shake as I set down this account. If someone finds it, know that I didn't leave by choice. The house keeps its tenants in ways that transcend leases and contracts. Some pay rent in money. Others, I'm beginning to understand, pay in different currencies altogether. The footsteps have started early. They're ascending now, not descending. They're coming for me, or perhaps I've always been meant to join them. The extra room breaker just flipped on, and this time, I can feel electricity coursing through the walls, awakening something that should have stayed sleeping. The door to my room is opening, though I locked it twice. The knob turns with deliberate slowness, and behind it, I can hear that wet breathing growing closer. The air thickens, taking on that organic, wrong smell that's haunted my clothes. Whatever enters won't be human, or won't be human anymore. But here's the thing I've realized. The truth that's been creeping up on me like those footsteps on the stairs. I'm not afraid anymore. The fear has transmuted into something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or acceptance. Maybe the house doesn't create victims. Maybe it creates whatever's been walking these halls at 3:47 a.m., whatever's been leaving those wet footprints, whatever's been trying to communicate through knotted fabric and impossible electricity. Maybe I've been the extra room all along, a space that shouldn't exist but does, drawing power from sources that don't appear on any blueprint. Maybe every tenant becomes part of the house's architecture eventually, absorbed into its breathing walls and watching shadows. Maybe that's why the others won't meet my eyes. They see I'm already changing, already becoming part of the structure's hidden geometry. The door is fully open now. I can see a figure in the doorway, thin and wet and wrong. It beckons with fingers that are too long, and I understand finally that the footsteps I've been hearing weren't someone leaving. They were someone coming home. And I think, no, I know, that tomorrow night at 3:47 a.m., there will be 2 sets of footsteps descending those stairs. The new tenant who takes my room will hear them, will set their own traps, will find their own wet footprints in flour. They'll ask questions the others won't answer, map spaces that don't add up, and eventually, inevitably, they'll write their own account of the house that breathes and watches and waits. The figure extends its hand to me. Behind it, I can see stairs leading down that weren't there before, descending past the basement into spaces that architecture forgot. The extra room breaker hums with power, and I understand now that it was never about electricity. It was about opening doors that should stay closed, or perhaps about keeping them closed until the right tenant came along. I'm standing now, walking toward the doorway. My feet leave wet prints on the floor, though I don't remember stepping in water. The fabric of my clothes twists itself into knots, all pointing downward. The house sighs with satisfaction, another piece clicking into place in its incomprehensible design. This is my last entry. If someone reads this, know that the footsteps you hear aren't ghosts or intruders. They're the house's circulatory system, its way of moving what needs to be moved, of maintaining the delicate balance between the space that exists and the space that shouldn't. Don't follow them. Don't scatter flour. Don't map the inconsistencies. Or do. The house is patient. The house is always looking for new tenants for its extra rooms, the ones that exist between the walls, beneath the basement, in the gaps that mathematics can't quite explain. I can hear my name being called from somewhere below, in a voice that sounds like mine, but waterlogged, ancient. The figure in my doorway smiles with too many teeth. It's 3:47 a.m., time to descend. Story 10. The mirror was already there when I moved in. Mrs. Kowalski, the landlord, mentioned it offhandedly during the walkthrough, her thick Polish accent making the words sound almost like a warning. Previous tenant, he leave this. Very old, very heavy. You want, I can have removed. She'd stood at the threshold of the studio, refusing to step inside, keys jangling in her weathered hand like prayer beads. I should have paid attention to that detail, but I was exhausted from the move, desperate for anything furnished in my price range, and the mirror, an enormous gilt-framed monstrosity that dominated the western wall, seemed harmless enough. Besides, it made the cramped studio feel twice its actual size. In Chicago's brutal rental market, you take what you can get. The first week passed without incident. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my sparse furniture, and tried to ignore the way the mirror's surface seemed to hold shadows a beat too long after I'd turned away. Old glass, I told myself. Probably warped with age. The frame itself was a work of art. Intricate carvings of vines and flowers that seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, revealing faces that weren't quite there when I looked directly at them. It was Tuesday night when I first noticed the discrepancy. I'd been working late on my laptop, the blue screen glow mixing with the amber streetlight filtering through my single window. A police siren wailed somewhere in the distance, a nightly Chicago lullaby. I stretched, glanced at the mirror, and froze. The curtain in the reflection was swaying gently, as if caught in a breeze. But my window was closed, had been closed all day against the October chill. I turned to look at the actual curtain, still, completely still. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflected curtain had stopped moving. I blamed exhaustion, too much coffee, the stress of starting a new job in a new city. But I found myself watching the mirror more carefully after that, testing it, moving objects around the apartment and checking their reflections. Everything seemed normal during these deliberate observations. It was only when I wasn't paying attention, when I'd catch the mirror in passing, that things seemed off. The bathroom door was the next thing I noticed. In reality, I always left it cracked open exactly 3 inches, a habit from childhood, needing that sliver of light in the darkness. But in the mirror, the door stood open wider, maybe 6 inches, sometimes 7. The gap yawned like a mouth, revealing a darkness that seemed deeper than the mere absence of light. I started keeping a notebook, documenting the inconsistencies, small things at first. A book spine facing the wrong way, a coffee mug's handle turned at an impossible angle, my jacket draped over the chair with one sleeve too long, reaching toward the floor like it was trying to crawl away. Each time I'd blink or look away, the reflection would correct itself, leaving me to question what I'd really seen. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie in bed, positioned unfortunately in full view of the mirror, and watch the reflected ceiling, counting the differences. The water stain near the corner was shaped like a hand in reality, but in the mirror it looked more like a face. The overhead light fixture, a simple frosted dome, appeared cracked in the reflection, thin dark lines spreading across its surface like a web. 3 weeks in, I decided to cover the mirror. I'd bought a queen-sized sheet specifically for this purpose, deep navy blue to block out any light. Standing on a stepladder at 2 a.m., I draped it over the massive frame, securing it with packing tape along the edges. The relief was immediate. The apartment felt smaller, yes, but also safer somehow. More mine. I slept deeply for the first time in days. I woke to find the sheet crumpled on the floor. The packing tape had been torn away, but not from my side. The edges were shredded as if someone had clawed at them from within the mirror itself. Long scratches marred the tape's surface, and when I held a piece up to the morning light, I could see what looked like fingerprint impressions pressed deep into the adhesive. My hands shook as I examined the mirror's surface. No marks, no signs of disturbance. Just my own pale reflection staring back, eyes hollowed from lack of sleep. I tried again that night, this time with a thick blanket and an entire roll of duct tape. I sealed every edge, pressing the tape firmly against the wall, overlapping each strip. I even moved my small bookshelf in front of it for good measure. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to a sound like fabric tearing. The blanket lay in tatters on the floor, the duct tape hanging in ribbons. The bookshelf had been pushed aside, not toppled, but carefully moved, as if someone had gently shifted it out of their way. I stopped trying to cover the mirror after that. Instead, I began to live with it, or around it, the way you might live with a dangerous roommate. Always aware, always watching, never fully relaxed. I developed habits, never looking directly at it after dark, avoiding its line of sight when undressing, positioning myself so I couldn't see it while eating. The mirror became a presence in the apartment, something to be negotiated with rather than ignored. Then things started disappearing. First, it was small items, a pen, a phone charger, a single sock. Things that could easily be misplaced in the chaos of daily life. But I'm not a careless person. I have systems, routines. The pen always goes back in the cup on my desk. The charger lives plugged into the outlet by the bed, yet they vanished. And then I'd see them in the mirror, the pen resting on the reflected desk, but slightly to the left of where it should be. The charger, coiled neatly on the reflected nightstand. The sock draped over the reflected chair. But when I'd turn to look at the actual locations, nothing. When I'd look back at the mirror, the items would still be there, taunting me from that reversed world. I started leaving notes for myself. Reality checks written on Post-its stuck to every surface. This is real. You are here. Trust your eyes, not the glass. But even these began to feel unreliable when I found one in the mirror that I hadn't written, stuck to the reflected refrigerator in handwriting that might have been mine if I'd been writing with my left hand. This is real too. The breaking point came on a Thursday. I'd returned from work to find my apartment key missing from my keychain. Just gone. The ring lighter in my pocket. The familiar weight absent. I searched everywhere, turned the studio upside down, even checked the hallway and stairs. Nothing. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, I collapsed on my bed and happened to glance at the mirror. There it was, the key, hanging from the reflected doorknob on the inside of the apartment. Not the outside where I'd need it to enter, but the inside, as if someone in that reflected room had locked themselves in. I stood slowly, approached the mirror with the careful steps of someone approaching a wild animal. The key glinted in the reflected light. Definitely mine. I could see the small scratch on its surface from when I'd dropped it on the sidewalk my first day. I reached out, my fingers touching the cold glass, tracing the outline of the reflected key. The surface rippled, like water, like liquid silver. The glass yielded slightly under my touch, not breaking, not cracking, but giving way with a subtle resistance that made my stomach turn. I jerked my hand back, and the mirror solidified instantly, but for just a moment, I'd felt something else through that permeable barrier. A different temperature, a different air pressure, as if the reflected room truly existed somewhere else. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound made me check the mirror, expecting to see someone standing in that reflected room, expecting to catch a glimpse of whoever, or whatever, was living parallel to me in that backward space. But the reflection remained frustratingly normal, showing only my own increasingly haggard appearance. It was nearly dawn when I saw the paper. A small white square in the mirror, stuck to the reflected wall beside the window. I sat up, squinted through the dim light. There was no paper on my actual wall, but in the mirror, it was clearly there. I could almost make out writing on it, dark ink against the white surface. I watched it for an hour, as the sunrise gradually illuminated both rooms, the real and the reflected. As the light grew stronger, the writing became clearer, though reversed in the mirror's surface. I grabbed my phone, took a photo, flipped the image. The message was simple, written in that same left-handed scrawl. "Don't erase me." My breath caught. I looked at the actual wall. Nothing. Back to the mirror. The note was still there. I stood, moved closer, studying the reflected note's position. It would be right about eye level, right where someone standing in that backwards room might place it to be sure it would be seen. I went to work in a daze, barely able to focus on spreadsheets and meetings while my mind raced. Was someone trapped in the mirror? Was it some kind of parallel dimension? Was I losing my mind entirely, experiencing some kind of breakdown triggered by isolation and stress? When I returned that evening, the note in the mirror was gone, but on my actual wall, in the exact spot where the reflected note had been, was an identical piece of paper. Same message, same handwriting, but now in my world, my reality. Don't erase me. I didn't touch it. I sat on my bed, staring at the paper, then at the mirror, then back at the paper. The mirror showed the note accurately now, a perfect reflection of the real thing on my wall. Whatever had been on the other side had crossed over. That's when I noticed my reflection wasn't quite right. It was subtle, the kind of thing you might not catch unless you were looking for it. My reflected self was sitting in the same position, wearing the same clothes, but the expression was different. While I sat rigid with fear, my reflection looked relieved. The mouth was curved in the slightest smile, the eyes brighter, more alive than mine had been in weeks. I raised my hand slowly. My reflection raised its hand too, but a fraction of a second late, as if it had to remember to follow along. I stood. It stood. I walked to the bathroom. It walked to the reflected bathroom. But when I came back out, my reflection was already seated on the bed again, waiting for me. The notebook I'd been using to document the inconsistencies lay open on my desk. I hadn't left it that way. I always closed it, paranoid about anyone seeing my increasingly unhinged observations. I approached carefully, peering at the pages. There was new writing. My handwriting, but neater, more controlled. You see me now. Good. We need to talk. I grabbed a pen, wrote beneath it. What are you? I turned to the mirror. My reflection was standing at the reflected desk, pen in hand, writing. When it finished, I looked down at my notebook. New words had appeared. I'm you. Or I was. Or I will be. Time works differently here. Here? The other side of the glass. The between space. I've been trying to get your attention for weeks. My hand trembled as I wrote. Are you trapped? The reflection smiled. I could see it in the mirror, even though my own face remained frozen in fear. New words appeared. We're both trapped. You in your world, me in mine. But the mirror is thinning. The boundary is breaking down. Why? Because you're aware now. Because you see the differences. Every time you notice an inconsistency, you weaken the barrier. Soon, one of us will have to choose. Choose what? The reflection stopped writing. In the mirror, I watched as my other self set down the pen, walked to the center of the room, and stood facing me directly. It mouthed words I couldn't hear, gesturing urgently at something behind me. I turned. Nothing there but my empty studio. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was writing again. I watched the words appear in my notebook. Which side is real? The note on my wall, "Don't erase me," suddenly made terrible sense. One of us wasn't real, or wouldn't be real once the barrier fully collapsed. One of us was a reflection that had gained too much substance, borrowed too much reality from the other. But which one? I looked at my hands, solid, warm, real. I could feel my heartbeat, taste the coffee I'd drunk that morning, remember my childhood, my mother's voice, the sensation of rain on my skin. These were real memories, real experiences, weren't they? In the mirror, my reflection had moved to the window, looking out at something I couldn't see. Its Chicago was different from mine. I could tell by the way the light hit its face, by the shadows that fell at wrong angles. How long had these two worlds been diverging? How long had we been splitting apart? I wrote frantically. How do I know which one of us is real? The reflection turned from the window, walked back to the desk. Words appeared. You don't. That's the point. The mirror doesn't distinguish. It only reflects what it's given, but sometimes it's given too much. What happens when the barrier breaks? One of us continues. One of us becomes the reflection permanently. My mouth went dry. I stood, approached the mirror slowly until I was inches from the glass. My reflection stood equally close, and for the first time I could see the fear in its eyes too. We were both real, both self-aware, both terrified of being erased. I pressed my palm against the glass. The surface rippled again, that liquid silver sensation, and my reflection pressed its palm against mine from the other side. For a moment, I felt warmth through the barrier. Another hand, another lifeline, another version of myself struggling to exist. The mirror shuddered. A crack appeared at the top of the frame, not in the glass, but in the frame itself, as if the weight of maintaining two realities was finally too much for the ancient wood. Dust sifted down, and in the mirror, I saw the same crack appearing in the reflected frame, spreading in the opposite direction. I stumbled back. My reflection stumbled back. We stared at each other across that thinning boundary, two versions of the same person, each convinced of our own reality, each terrified of becoming nothing more than an image in glass. The notebook lay open on my desk. As I watched, words appeared without either of us writing. Choose soon. The mirror can't hold both of you much longer. I don't know how much time I have left. Hours, maybe days. The cracks in the frame are spreading, and sometimes I catch glimpses of that other Chicago through the fissures, a city that's almost mine but not quite, where the Willis Tower leans just a degree to the left, where the lake is a shade too green, where the crowds move in patterns I don't recognize. My reflection and I have stopped trying to communicate. We just watch each other, waiting for the moment when the mirror finally decides which one of us is real. Sometimes I think I see recognition in its eyes, a remembering of what it's like to be me. Other times I wonder if I'm the one remembering, if I'm the copy trying to hold on to someone else's life. The note still hangs on my wall. Don't erase me. I don't know if I wrote it anymore. I don't know if the plea is mine or his. All I know is that one of us will soon be nothing more than a reflection. A thing that exists only when observed, that disappears the moment someone looks away. And the terrifying truth is this: I no longer know which side of the mirror I'm on. The glass is so thin now that sometimes I can hear breathing that isn't mine, feel a heartbeat that follows a different rhythm. Mrs. Kowalski hasn't come by in weeks. I wonder what she sees when she looks at the apartment from the outside. Does she see me or him, or something else entirely caught between two states of being? Last night, I found another note. This one slipped under my door. Mrs. Kowalski's handwriting, shaky with age or fear. I told him not to leave the mirror. I told the one before you too. They never listen. I want to ask her what she means. I want to know the history of this cursed glass. How many tenants have stood where I stand, fighting for their reality? But I'm afraid to leave the apartment. Afraid that if I step outside, I won't be able to return. Or worse, that when I return, it won't be me who enters, but him, wearing my face, living my life, while I watch from behind the silver surface, pounding on glass that no one can hear. The mirror shudders again as I write this. The cracks are spreading faster now, creating a spider web of fractures that distort both reflections. In some fragments, I see myself as I am. In others, I see him. And in the spaces between the cracks, I see nothing at all, just a darkness that seems to pull at the edges of existence itself. Soon, one of us will be erased. I just pray I'm real enough to remember which one. Story 11. The first time I noticed them, I'd been living in the basement apartment for exactly 17 days. Boston rain has a particular quality to it, heavy, persistent, almost purposeful. And that October evening, it hammered against the narrow window wells with unusual intensity. I was unpacking the last of my boxes, trying to convince myself this move had been necessary, when the ceiling began to weep. Not drip, weep. The moisture spread across the plaster in slow, deliberate patterns, darkening from pale gray to deep amber. I stood there, holding a half-wrapped coffee mug, watching as the stains arranged themselves into shapes that made my stomach tighten. 5 distinct silhouettes, roughly human in proportion, all facing the door to my apartment. Their heads tilted at the same angle, as if frozen mid-turn, caught in the act of looking at something, or someone, about to enter. I told myself it was pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns where none exist, like seeing faces in clouds or hearing voices in white noise. But clouds don't maintain their shape for hours, and white noise doesn't whisper specific words. The super, a weathered man everyone called Paulie, came down when I called about the leak. He stood in my living room, neck craned back, studying the ceiling with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. "Building's old," he said finally, his Boston accent thick as molasses. "Settles funny when it rains. Water finds paths." He paused, still looking up. "This place, it drains things downward. Always has." I asked what he meant by things. He shrugged, already heading for the door. "Memories, mostly. Don't worry about it. Just keep your stuff away from the walls when it storms." The stains didn't fade when the rain stopped. Instead, they began their descent. A slow, viscous journey down my walls that took 3 days to complete. The trails they left were the color of old coffee, of dried blood, of something that had once been alive. I scrubbed at them with every cleaning product I owned, but they'd already soaked too deep into the drywall. The marks remained, faint but persistent, like scars. The second storm came a week later. This time I was ready with buckets and towels, but the water didn't drip. It simply appeared, seeping through the plaster as if the ceiling were skin and the moisture was sweat. 6 figures now. The new one stood slightly apart from the others, its posture different, shoulders hunched, head bowed, as if it had arrived late and felt ashamed. I started documenting everything. Photos, videos, measurements. The stains always appeared in the same sequence. First, a general darkening of the ceiling, then the gradual emergence of the shapes, always facing my door, always in that same waiting posture. The new additions, because there were always new additions, appeared at the back of the queue, each one slightly different in size or stance, but all sharing that same patient, expectant quality. It was during the 4th storm that I discovered the closet situation. I'd stored my wet umbrella in the hallway closet after coming in from work, placing it carefully in the back corner to dry. The next morning, I found it in the utility closet near the water heater, soaking wet, as if it had just been pulled from a lake. The same thing happened with a raincoat I'd hung in my bedroom, a pair of boots I'd left by the door, even a towel I'd used to dry my hair. They all migrated to that utility closet, and they were always wet. Not damp, not humid, but genuinely wet, dripping onto the concrete floor. I installed a lock on the utility closet. The items still appeared inside. I set up a camera. The footage showed nothing, just a time skip, a glitch in the recording where one frame showed an empty closet and the next showed my belongings, arranged neatly on the shelves, water pooling beneath them. By November, the queue had grown to 12 figures. I'd started sleeping poorly, waking up at 3 a.m. with the sensation of being watched, not from outside, from above, from the ceiling where those patient shapes waited. Sometimes, in the margin between sleep and waking, I could hear them shifting, the plaster creaking under their weight. Impossible, of course. They were just stains, water damage, nothing more. But I began to notice details I'd missed before. The 3rd figure from the left had one arm slightly raised, as if about to knock. The 7th figure's head was turned more than the others, looking back over its shoulder at something behind it. And the newest addition, number 12, stood with its feet together and arms at its sides, military straight, like someone standing at attention. I started researching the building's history, built in 1923 as a boarding house, converted to apartments in the 50s. Nothing unusual there. But the Boston Globe archives told a different story through their absence. Gaps in the record. Years where the building's address simply didn't appear in any listings or advertisements. 1934 to 1937. 1952, 1971 to 1973, as if the building had periodically ceased to exist, or at least ceased to matter to anyone keeping records. Paulie noticed me becoming obsessed. He'd stop by unannounced, always with some maintenance excuse, checking the radiator, testing the smoke detector. But really, I think, checking on me. One evening, after another storm had added 2 more figures to the queue, 14 now, pressed closer together to fit, he lingered by my door. "You ever wonder," he said, not quite looking at me, "where memories go when we forget them?" I told him they were just gone. Neurons that stop firing, connections that fade. He shook his head. "Nothing's ever really gone in old buildings like this. It all settles somewhere, usually in the foundation, sometimes in the walls." He glanced at my ceiling. "Sometimes it pools in the low places, waiting." Waiting for what? He didn't answer, just reminded me that rent was due on the 1st and left. The dream started in December. I was standing in a line, not my apartment, somewhere else, somewhere older. The walls were different, darker wood instead of drywall, gas lamps instead of electric lights. But the feeling was the same, that sense of patient waiting, of inevitable arrival. In the dream, I could turn my head just enough to see others in line with me. Their faces were blurred, indistinct, like looking at someone through frosted glass. But I knew them. Somehow, I knew each one. The woman who'd lived here in 1934, waiting for her husband to return from a trip he'd never come back from. The man from 1952, standing at this same door every evening, convinced his dead mother would answer if he knocked long enough. The family from 1971, who'd disappeared one night during a thunderstorm, leaving dinner still warm on the table. They were all here, all waiting, all looking at my door with that same patient expectation. I woke from these dreams drenched in sweat that smelled wrong, mineral heavy, like groundwater, like something that had filtered through layers of earth and time before reaching me. The utility closet became a repository of impossibilities. Not just my things anymore. Items I'd never owned appeared there, always wet. A child's raincoat from the 1960s, the label still legible. A leather satchel with papers inside, the ink running but the date visible. September 15th, 1934. A pair of women's boots. The style from the early 70s, water pooling in their cracked soles. I tried to throw them away. They returned, wetter than before. I tried to burn them. The fire wouldn't take. The wetness went deeper than just water, some essential dampness that refused heat. January brought the worst storm yet. The ceiling didn't just weep this time. It poured emotion into my apartment. Not water, but something thicker, more intentional. The queue had grown to 23 figures, and I could see them moving. Not obviously, not quickly, but in that way distant stars move if you watch them long enough. A gradual shift that you can't quite catch happening but can't deny has occurred. They were getting closer to the door. I stopped leaving during storms, started calling in sick to work, ordered groceries for delivery. The apartment became my entire world, and that world was shrinking, compressed by the weight of all those waiting figures above me. Paulie found me one morning, sitting in my living room, staring up at the ceiling. I'd been there all night, watching them inch forward, measuring their progress with pencil marks on the wall. He didn't seem surprised. "You know what this building used to be?" he asked, settling into my only other chair with the gravity of someone about to reveal a long-held secret. I told him, "Boarding house." "Before that," he said, "during the construction. There was a flood, big one. Construction workers took shelter in the foundation, the part that's now your apartment. 23 of them. Storm lasted 4 days. By the time it ended..." He trailed off, but I understood. They'd waited, and waited. And something about that waiting had soaked into the bones of the building itself. "But they got out," I said. It came out as a question. Paulie looked at me for a long moment. "Sure, they got out. Everyone always gets out eventually. The question is what they leave behind." That night I understood what he meant. The figures on my ceiling had finally reached the door. 23 water-stained silhouettes pressed against the barrier between my ceiling and whatever lay above it. And I realized, with a clarity that felt like drowning, that they weren't trying to get in. They were waiting for me to join them. The wetness in the utility closet wasn't from rain. It was from memory. The building's memory of that long-ago flood, playing out again and again, dragging pieces of every resident who'd ever felt trapped here into its repetition. My umbrella, my coat, my boots, they were practice runs. The building learning my shape, my weight, my particular way of being. I could feel it even now, that pull upward. Every time it rained, I felt lighter, less substantial, as if parts of me were evaporating, rising through the floor above to take my place in that patient queue. And the worst part, the part that made me question my own sanity, was that it didn't feel wrong. It felt like coming home, like joining a conversation I'd been listening to my whole life without realizing it. The queue now has 24 shadows. The 24th appeared last Tuesday, during a light drizzle that shouldn't have been enough to activate whatever process creates them. It stands slightly apart from the others, shoulders set in a posture I recognize from my own reflection. It's the right height, the right build, the right patient, expectant stance of someone who's realized they've been waiting their whole life for a door to open, even if they're no longer sure they want to see what's on the other side. I haven't left the apartment in 8 days. The weather forecast shows rain for the next week. Paulie hasn't come by. I think he knows better now. The utility closet is so full of wet memories that water seeps under the door, spreading across my floor in patterns that look almost like footprints, leading from the closet to my bed, from my bed to the exact spot where I stand each morning, staring up at the queue. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear them breathing. 23 sets of lungs that shouldn't exist, drawing air that isn't there, waiting for something that already happened or hasn't happened yet, or is happening continuously in some fold of time that old buildings create in their foundations. The building drains memories downward, Paulie said, but he never said what happens when the basement is full. When there's nowhere left for the memories to go but back up, carrying whatever they've collected with them. I'm standing beneath them now, the queue of 24. The rain is starting again. I can hear it against the windows, feel it in the way the air pressure changes. The ceiling is beginning to darken, and I know with a certainty that tastes like mineral water and old wood, that when this storm ends, there will be 25 figures in the queue. The 25th won't be standing apart. It will be at the door, hand raised to knock, forever about to enter, forever about to leave, forever caught in that moment of transition that old buildings remember better than any human mind could. I should leave, pack my things, break the lease, run. But I'm already wet. Have been since I moved in, probably. The dampness that won't leave my clothes, the sound of dripping that follows me from room to room, the water that pools in my footprints even on dry days. It's not from the building, it's from me. I'm already draining upward, one drop at a time, joining that patient queue that waits for doors that won't open, for storms that won't end, for memories that won't forget themselves no matter how hard the living try to leave them behind. The ceiling is weeping again, and this time I understand why. It's not the building crying, it's everyone who never really left, including me. Story 12. The fluorescent lights hummed their sick yellow song as I settled into another graveyard shift at Morrison's Auto Repair. 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, that dead hour when the world holds its breath. I'd been working nights for 6 months, long enough that solitude had become a companion. That's when I heard it, the grinding whine of a tow truck's winch. I watched through the window as headlights swept the fence. The driver backed an old sedan into Bay 3, unhitched it, and left without a word. A 1987 Buick Century, powder blue beneath layers of road grime. Something about it made my skin crawl, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way the dust seemed to shimmer under the shop lights, or how the air around it felt dense, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I approached slowly, work boots echoing against concrete. No keys in the ignition, no registration visible. I opened the driver's door, releasing a smell of old leather and ozone. The interior was pristine, too pristine. The steering wheel gleamed as if just detailed, yet dust motes danced in my flashlight beam, suspended in air that felt thicker than it should be. The glove compartment opened with a soft click. Inside, folded neatly, were 3 work orders for Morrison's auto repair. My hand trembled as I unfolded them. My signature stared back at me from the authorization line. That distinctive way I loop my J's, the slight leftward slant of my handwriting. But the date was tomorrow. Wednesday, 3:47 a.m. I checked my watch. Tuesday, 3:15 a.m. The papers felt wrong between my fingers, too new and too old simultaneously. The ink seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it, words rearranging themselves in my peripheral vision. I set them on the workbench and took a step back, my breath coming in short bursts that fogged in air that suddenly felt 20 degrees colder. The work order was specific. Replace alternator, adjust timing belt, repair driver's side mirror. Standard stuff. What wasn't standard was the note in the margin, also in my handwriting. Check under passenger seat. Important. My hands moved before my brain could object, reaching under the worn fabric. My fingers found something hard and rectangular. A cassette tape, unlabeled, the kind nobody had used in 20 years. I held it up to the light, and that's when I noticed my tools had moved. The socket wrench I'd left on the bench now hung in its designated spot on the pegboard. The oil pan I'd been using to drain a Honda earlier sat clean and dry on the shelf, though I knew I hadn't washed it yet. Even my coffee mug had relocated from the desk to the break room, visible through the office window, steam still rising from coffee I hadn't poured. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe I'd cleaned up and forgotten. But then I saw the security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. I'd check the footage later, had to be sure. I grabbed the shop's old boombox from the shelf, a relic from the previous owner that we kept for its radio during long shifts. The cassette deck still worked, barely. I slipped the tape inside and pressed play. Static filled the garage, then cleared into the sound of a police dispatcher. All units, we have a 1054 at Morrison's Auto Repair, 4421 Industrial Boulevard. Possible injury, mechanic trapped under vehicle. Victim described as male, approximately 35, wearing a blue work jacket with... I looked down at my blue work jacket, red striping on the shoulders. Responding unit notes, a 1987 Buick Century in Bay 3, last 4 of plate, 7749. My legs carried me to the back of the Buick. The license plate was caked with mud, but I could make out the last 4 digits, 7749. The transmission continued. Update. Mechanic has been freed, appears disoriented. Claiming to have been working on a vehicle that hasn't been serviced yet. Possible head trauma. Requesting psychiatric evaluation. The timestamp on the dispatch, Wednesday, 6:22 a.m. tomorrow morning, 3 hours after I'd supposedly signed those work orders. I turned off the cassette player, my fingers shaking so badly I had to try twice to hit the button. The silence that followed wasn't really silence. I could hear my heartbeat, the buzz of electricity through old wiring, and something else. A soft ticking, like a clock, but not quite synchronized with real time. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes seeming to run backward for just a moment. I needed air. I stumbled toward the garage door, but my feet tangled in an air hose that hadn't been there seconds before. As I caught myself against the workbench, I noticed the Buick's hood was now open, just slightly, maybe 3 inches, but enough to see darkness beneath that seemed too deep, too complete. The smart thing would be to leave. Clock out, go home, pretend this shift never happened. But the work orders pulled at me with a gravity I couldn't explain. If I had signed them tomorrow, if I was going to sign them, then what? Was I trapped in some kind of loop? Or was this just the exhaustion finally catching up? My mind creating elaborate hallucinations from too many lonely nights and too much caffeine? The Buick's engine was wrong. Not damaged, but wrong in a way that made my eyes water. Components seemed to exist in multiple positions simultaneously, as if I were seeing several moments overlapped. The alternator was both functioning and burnt out. When I blinked, everything snapped into focus. Just a normal engine. The alternator clearly needed replacing. I laughed, short and sharp. Stress. That's all this was. I gathered my tools, muscle memory taking over, but as I worked, things kept shifting. I'd set down a wrench and find it in my hand again. I'd remove a bolt and find it already in the parts tray. The new alternator appeared before I'd gone to get it. Worse were the marks. Fingerprints in grease that weren't mine. Tool marks on untouched bolts, as if someone else was working alongside me, always just out of sight. The radio, I hadn't turned it back on, but suddenly it was playing. Not the cassette this time, but the regular FM band. Local emergency services, the scanner frequency we sometimes monitored during severe weather. But the calls were wrong, temporarily displaced. Domestic disturbance at 451 Maple Street, caller reports. And then my voice, cutting in. No, I already tightened that bolt. I know I did. But I hadn't said anything. My mouth was closed, had been closed. The radio continued with my voice. The tools keep moving. Someone's here. Someone's been here. Will be here. The timeline's all wrong. I spun around scanning the empty garage. Nothing but shadows and machinery. But the shadows seemed deeper now, and when I moved, they didn't quite follow properly, lagging behind or sometimes jumping ahead of my motions. The driver's side mirror, the last item on the work order. It hung at an impossible angle. The glass cracked in a spider web pattern. I approached it slowly, and in the fractured reflection, I saw myself. Multiple versions, each in slightly different positions. One was under the car. One was standing behind me. One was signing paperwork at the desk. All of them were me. All of them were now, and none of them made sense. I reached out to touch the mirror, and that's when the real horror began. My reflection moved first. Not a trick of the cracked glass, not a delayed reaction. My reflection's hand rose a full second before mine, guiding my movement like a puppeteer. I tried to pull back, but my arm continued forward, following the path my reflection had already traced. My fingers touched the glass, and the world folded. For a moment, or an hour, or a lifetime, I existed in multiple states. I was under the car, gasping for air as the jack failed. I was in the break room, coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips. I was outside in the parking lot, watching myself through the window. I was signing work orders dated for tomorrow and yesterday and never. When reality snapped back, I was on my knees beside the Buick, gasping. The mirror was whole, perfect, reflecting a version of the garage that didn't quite match what my eyes saw directly. In the reflection, tools hung in different positions. The clock on the wall showed 6:22 a.m. The work orders on the bench were completed, filed, and dated a week ago. I stood on shaking legs and noticed my tools had moved again. But this time, I could see the pattern. They weren't randomly displaced. They were exactly where I would have put them after finishing the job. The oil pan was clean because I would clean it. The coffee mug was in the break room because I would move it there. Everything was exactly where it would be after I finished the work I hadn't started yet. Or had I? I checked the Buick. The alternator was new, properly installed. The timing belt perfectly tensioned. The mirror reflecting normally, showing me pale and wide-eyed but singular. Present. Real. The work was done. Had been done. Would be done. The cassette player clicked on by itself, but this time it wasn't the police dispatch. It was my voice, tired and confused. If you're hearing this, you've already been through it once. Or you're about to go through it. Time's not working right in Bay 3. The car, Christ, I don't know what the car is, but it's not from now. Not from any single now. It exists across multiple moments, and when you work on it, you get pulled into its timeline. Timelines. Plural. The recording continued. I think the car's stuck between moments, and now I am too. Every version of us that's worked on it. The radio picks up temporal echoes, dispatch calls that haven't happened yet. Don't trust the mirrors. They show different nows. The work gets done because it's already been done, will be done, is being done. The recording started to loop, but the words came out different. If you're hearing this, run. Get out of Bay 3. Static. Then silence. I looked at the work orders on the bench. My signature was there, but the date had changed. Not tomorrow anymore. Today, an hour ago. The timestamp read 2:15 a.m., an hour before the tow truck had arrived. Before the car had arrived. But the car had always been here, hadn't it? I couldn't remember anymore. The tools on the pegboard were wrong again. Or right. They hung in positions I'd never used, but when I reached for what I needed, it was exactly where my hand moved. Like muscle memory for work I hadn't done yet. The wrench I needed for the oil pan. Somehow I knew it would be 3 spots left of its usual position, and it was. The police scanner crackled. Unit 7 responding to Morrison's auto repair. No sign of disturbance. Bay 3 is empty, has been empty all night according to security footage. But I was looking at the Buick. It sat there, solid as regret, real as the grease under my fingernails. I walked to the security monitor in the office, rewound the footage. The screen showed Bay 3, empty, had been empty all night. The timestamp showed me working on nothing, tools moving through empty air, signing papers that didn't exist. Except they did exist. I held them in my hands. The Buick's keys, when had I found those, were in my pocket. The new alternator's packaging was in the dumpster out back. The old, burnt-out one sat on the bench, still warm. I heard footsteps in the parking lot. Through the window, I saw myself walking toward the entrance. The other me looked exhausted, confused. He checked his watch, then looked through the window directly at me. Our eyes met, and he mouthed, "Run." But I couldn't run. I'd already been here. The footsteps stopped at the door, but when it opened, no one entered. Just cold air carrying ozone and old leather. The Buick's engine turned over. Nobody was in the driver's seat, but it purred, perfectly tuned. The mirror showed the garage from an impossible angle, and in it I saw myself finishing the work, signing papers. The cassette tape was in my hand again, though I'd left it in the player. Or had I? Time wasn't working right in Bay 3. Maybe it never had. Maybe it never would. Maybe this was just what the night shift had always been, and my mind had finally stopped filtering out the impossibilities. I looked at my watch. 3:47 a.m., Wednesday. The exact time on the work order. I was signing it now, hand moving without my volition, following the path it had already traced, would trace, was tracing. The signature was perfect, exactly as it had been, would be, is. The tow truck's lights swept across the fence. The driver was coming to pick up the Buick. Had already picked it up, would pick it up, but it would return. It always returned. Because somewhere, somewhen, I was always working on it. Had always been working on it. Would always be working on it. The radio whispered my voice again. The car's not stuck. We are. Every version of us that's touched it. Past, present, future. All of us existing in Bay 3 simultaneously. Doing the work that's been done, needs doing, will be done. The tools know. They've always known. They move to where they need to be across all timelines. I set down the wrench and watched it slide 3 inches to the left, to where I'd need it in 5 minutes, or where I'd needed it 5 minutes ago. The distinction no longer mattered. Outside, dawn was breaking. The light slanted through the windows at impossible angles, casting shadows that moved independent of their sources. My shadow fixed a car that wasn't there. I walked to the office to clock out, but my time card was already punched. 6:22 a.m. The exact time from the police dispatch that hadn't happened yet. I wasn't scheduled for this shift, had never been, but here I was. The front door opened, and I walked in. The other me, the one who'd warned me to run. He looked older, more tired, grease stains on his jacket and patterns from next week's work. He said nothing, just walked to Bay 3 and began working on the Buick that was and wasn't there. I understood then. We were all here. Every version that had touched the car across every timeline. The work got done because it had always been done, was being done by versions of me scattered across time like playing cards thrown into the wind. I walked out into the morning that might have been yesterday or tomorrow, leaving myself behind to continue the work. The parking lot stretched before me, but when I looked back, Morrison's Auto Repair was exactly as it always was. Bay 3's door was closed, had been closed all night. My car started on the first try. The alternator was new, though I couldn't remember replacing it. In the rearview mirror, I saw myself through the shop window, working on a car that wasn't there, existing in a timeline that ran parallel to the world everyone else lived in. The radio crackled. "All units, we have a 1054 at Morrison's Auto Repair." I turned it off and kept driving, knowing I'd be back. The work continued, somewhere in Bay 3, where time had given up trying to flow in just one direction. The Buick would be waiting. It always was. Samar Kaidor. Okay, to story 13. The digital clock's red numbers burned through my eyelids before I even opened them. 318. Always 318. The digits shimmer and shake for exactly half a second, like they're trying to become something else but can't quite manage it. I've been driving the I-80 corridor for 11 years, and I've slept in this truck stop dormitory maybe 60 times. Every single time I wake in the dead hours before dawn, it's 318. The room smells of diesel exhaust and old coffee, that particular blend of industrial fatigue that seeps into everything here. My back aches against the thin mattress as I sit up, feet finding the cold linoleum floor. The dormitory is 12 beds separated by dividers. Through gaps, I hear other drivers sleeping. But there's another sound, a subsonic hum vibrating through the metal frame. I reach for my jacket hanging on the hook, and my fingers brush against something in the pocket. Cold metal. I pull out a key, brass, old-fashioned, with teeth worn smooth from use. There's road dust on it, gritty between my fingers. But it's not the gray-brown dust from this stretch of Nevada highway. This dust is red, like dried blood, like the earth from somewhere I've never been. I left nothing on the shelf last night. I never do anymore. But the key is there anyway, heavy in my palm, real as the ache in my lower back. The hallway outside is lit by fluorescent tubes that buzz and flicker in a rhythm I can almost decode. The carpet is that industrial gray-green that hides stains, worn thin in the middle from decades of tired feet. But there are other marks too. Twin wheel tracks from a rolling suitcase, pressed deep into the pile. They lead down the hall, past rooms 1 through 11, and stop at a door that shouldn't exist. The building plans are posted by the fire exit. I've studied them during countless sleepless hours. 11 rooms, 1 communal bathroom, 1 emergency exit. But the wheel marks lead to a 12th door, painted the same institutional beige as the others, with a number that my eyes can't quite focus on. Sometimes it looks like 12. Sometimes it looks like 318. I follow the tracks because I always follow the tracks. My bare feet make no sound on the carpet. The humming grows stronger, resonating in my chest cavity like I'm standing too close to a massive subwoofer. The mystery door is slightly ajar, darkness visible through the crack. Not the darkness of an unlit room. This is something thicker, more substantial. It has weight. From somewhere inside comes a sound that makes my teeth ache. Someone whistling. The melody is familiar, though I won't hear it on the CB radio for another 3 hours. It's always the same trucker who requests it, voice crackling through the static at 6:18 sharp. "This one goes out to the night shift," he'll say. Though when I ask other drivers about him, they look at me like I'm describing a fever dream. The whistling stops. The silence that follows is worse. I back away from the door, my hand clenched around the strange key. In the communal bathroom, I splash cold water on my face and study my reflection in the spotted mirror. Dark circles ring my eyes like bruises. My skin has taken on a grayish cast, the pallor of someone who hasn't seen real sunlight in weeks. But it's my eyes that disturb me most. The pupils are dilated despite the harsh fluorescent light, and in their depths, I swear I can see movement. Shapes shifting in the black. Back in my room, I check my phone. 3:42. Wall clock, 3:18. Second hand ticking steadily. The digital alarm insists it's 3:18, numbers no longer trembling. I dress quickly, pulling on yesterday's jeans and the flannel shirt that smells of truck stops and long highways. The key goes back in my jacket pocket, though I didn't consciously decide to keep it. My fingers find other things there too. A book of matches from a diner I've never visited. A receipt for diesel fuel dated 3 weeks in the future. A photograph worn soft at the edges. The photograph shows the hallway outside, but in it, the door that shouldn't exist is wide open, and standing in the doorway is a figure I can't quite make out, face lost in shadow. The CB in the common area crackles. Static becomes voices speaking backwards. One voice rises clear. He's walking the pattern again. I stop. Silence. The parking lot is vast and mostly empty at this hour, sodium lights casting everything in sickly orange. My truck sits where I left it, a 2018 Peterbilt that's taken me 500,000 miles. But there's another vehicle parked beside it that wasn't there when I arrived. It's a truck identical to mine. Same model, same year, same wear patterns on the tires. The license plate is mine, down to the bent corner where I backed into a loading dock in Omaha. I walk around it, through the window, my rabbit's foot on the mirror, my ex-wife's photo, the coffee stain from Cheyenne. But it's not my truck. Mine is right there. The key in my pocket grows warm. I head back inside, needing coffee. The vending area is harsh under white light. In the coffee machine's reflection, I see someone standing behind me. I turn. Empty. But wet footprints lead from where the figure stood. The prints are wrong. Too many toes. They gleam like oil. I follow them because what else can I do? They lead past the dormitory, past the bathroom, past the door that shouldn't exist. This time it's wide open. The darkness inside has texture, almost solid. It reminds me of looking into a cave, that sense of vast space that light can't quite penetrate. The footprints lead directly into it. From somewhere in that darkness comes a sound like breathing, but the rhythm is off. Too long between inhale and exhale. Too many lungs working in unison. The whistling starts again. Closer now. I recognize the melody finally. It's a song my father used to whistle when I was young, working on cars in our garage. He died when I was 15, crushed under a vehicle that slipped off its jack. The last time I heard him whistle this tune was the morning of the accident. The digital clock on the wall flickers. For just an instant it reads something else. Not 3:18, not even numbers. Symbols I don't recognize, that hurt to look at directly. A hand touches my shoulder, cold, even through my jacket. I don't turn around. I can't, because in the reflection in the darkness, and how can darkness have a reflection? I see myself standing there, but this version of me is wrong. The smile is too wide, the eyes don't blink, and behind this other me, stretching back into impossible distance, are more. Dozens, hundreds, all of me, all wrong, all waiting. The one directly behind me leans close. I feel breath on my neck that smells of diesel and something else, something organic and wrong. It whispers, and its voice is mine from years ago, or years from now. You've been driving this route for 11 years, but check your logbook, check the dates. It's all the same year, the same month, the same week, over and over. I want to run, but my legs won't respond. The other versions of me press closer, their breathing synchronizing into that wrong rhythm I heard from the dark room. The whistling grows louder, coming from all their mouths at once. In my pocket, the key is burning hot now. I pull it out, and in its brass surface, I see a reflection that makes my stomach clench. It's not the hallway. It's a room I recognize but have never seen before. Metal walls, no windows, a single door with no handle on the inside. And in the corner, someone sits with their back to me, rocking slowly back and forth. The figure in the reflection turns its head, and I see my own face, aged beyond recognition, eyes wild with a knowledge I don't want to possess. The me behind me speaks again. Room 318. You check in, but you already checked in. Years ago, or yesterday. Time doesn't work right here. The accident on the ice outside Cheyenne, did you really correct that skid? Memories feel uncertain. When did I last call anyone? When did I last eat anything that wasn't from these vending machines? The footprints begin to move, sliding across the linoleum like living things, tracing a pattern I've seen before, carved into my truck's sleeping berth, scratched in bathroom stalls, drawn in dust on windows. All the other versions of me start walking backwards into the dark room. The one behind me remains, its grip tightening. You can keep driving the pattern, keep waking at 3:18. Or you can use the key. The brass key throbs in my hand like a heartbeat. I look at it again, and now I can see there's an inscription on the bow. Letters that shift and change even as I read them. Sometimes they spell my name. Sometimes they spell room 318. Sometimes they're those symbols that hurt to look at. The humming that's been constant background noise suddenly stops. The silence is deafening. In that silence, I hear something that makes my blood freeze. The sound of an engine starting. My engine. My truck. I rush to the window. In the parking lot, both trucks are running, exhaust clouds rising into the pre-dawn darkness. In the driver's seat of one, I can see a silhouette. It turns to look at me and waves. The gesture is friendly, casual, terrifying. The truck pulls away, taillights receding into the distance. The other truck remains, engine idling, driver's door open, waiting. Behind me, the other me laughs, a sound like grinding gears. Every night you send another one out. How many of you are driving the highways now? Dozens, hundreds, all leaving from here from 3:18 from the room that doesn't exist. I turn finally, having to see it face to face, but the hallway is empty. The wet footprints are gone. The door that shouldn't exist is closed, looking perfectly normal, numbered clearly as 12. The key in my hand is just a regular room key now, plastic, with 12 embossed on the tag. I walk to the door because I have to know. The key slides into the lock with a soft click. Inside is just a room. A normal dormitory room like all the others. Single bed, thin mattress, particle board divider. But on the shelf sits a CB radio, one that shouldn't be here. It's on, tuned to channel 19. A voice crackles through, my voice, from somewhere out on the highway. This one goes out to the night shift, to the one still waiting at mile marker 318. Your turn's coming. The transmission ends. Static fills the room. I sit on the bed, key still in my hand. The digital clock on the nightstand reads 3:18. I watch it for what feels like hours, but the numbers never change. The trembling of the digits has stopped. They're steady now, permanent. Outside in the hall, I hear footsteps, slow, deliberate. They stop at my door. There's no knock, just breathing on the other side. That wrong rhythm. Too many lungs. The doorknob begins to turn. I could run, could take the truck that's still waiting outside and drive into the dawn. But I know where I'll end up. Back here. It's always back here. 3:18 at mile marker 318, where the pattern keeps repeating, where every version of me eventually returns. The door opens. Standing there is someone I recognize but have never seen before. Myself, but older, tired, wearing the same clothes but faded, like they've been washed too many times or exposed to too much sun. This me looks at me with something like pity. First time you've made it this far, the older me says. Usually you just go back to sleep. Wake up at 3:18, find things in your pockets, follow the tracks. But tonight you found the key. I hold it up. It's brass again, old, with those shifting inscriptions. The older me nods. It opens the way out, or the way in, depends on your perspective. The door at the end of the hall, the real one, not the one we see. But here's the thing. I've used it. We've all used it. And we all end up back here anyway. Why? The older me smiles, that too wide smile from the reflection. We're not the original. He's still out there, driving. We're echoes. dreams he has between 3:17 and 3:18. We think we're real, but we're iterations caught in the loop. The CB crackles with something else, transmitted from deep underground. Pattern breaking, too many iterations, system failing. The older me looks concerned for the first time. That's new. That's... The sentence trails off as the lights flicker. When they steady, the older me is gone. I'm alone in the room with the CB radio and the key. Outside, I hear engines starting. Many engines. I go to the window and see the parking lot is full now. Dozens of identical trucks, all mine, all running. Behind their wheels sit versions of me. Some younger, some older, some wrong in ways I can't quite define. They're all looking at me, waiting. The key in my hand isn't brass anymore. It's something else. Something that hurts to hold but impossible to drop. It's growing, changing, becoming less like a key and more like... I can't finish the thought. Can't look at it directly. The digital clock flickers. 3:19. Then back to 3:18. Then 3:19 again. The numbers are fighting. Reality stuttering. I understand now. Every time I drive past mile marker 318, something is left behind. A possibility, a fear, a dream. They accumulate here, in this place that exists in the margin between seconds. And now there are too many. The system, whatever it is, can't contain us all. The CB radio explodes with voices, all mine, all talking at once, describing different highways, different accidents, different choices. In the cacophony, I hear one clear message. Use the key. End the pattern. But end it how? I leave the room, key burning in my hand. The hallway stretches impossibly long, doors multiplying. 318, 318, 318. Through the cracks, I see myself. Sleeping, waking, dying, driving, all simultaneous. At the end, a door made of shadow. The key reaches toward it like magnet to iron. Behind me, footsteps. All my iterations following. I reach the door. The key slides into a lock that shouldn't exist. Inside, a view of the highway from above. My truck approaching mile marker 318. Another iteration will be born. The pattern will continue. Unless. The key turns. Reality tears. I'm in two places at once. In the doorway and in the truck. All the iterations collapsing into a single moment of choice. Mile marker 318 approaches. I could swerve, could stop, or I could keep driving, knowing each passage creates another me, trapped between seconds. The radio in the real truck crackles. My voice, from the place that shouldn't exist. Choose. Mile marker 318. I pass it, and I wake in the dormitory, the digital clock reading 318, the numbers trembling for exactly half a second. There's something in my jacket pocket. Cold metal. A key. The pattern continues. The pattern will continue until reality breaks under the weight of iterations, or until one of us finds the courage to stop driving. But we never do, because we're drivers. The road calls, and we answer, even when it leads nowhere, even when it leads back to the same moment. 318. Always 318. The digits tremble, and I begin again. Story 14. The first time it happened, I convinced myself I'd forgotten to turn off the TV before heading to the shower. Simple mistake. Long day at the office. Exhaustion playing tricks on memory. But deep in my gut, beneath layers of rational explanation, something cold and primitive whispered that I was lying to myself. I worked the late shift at the data center downtown, 4 to 10, monitoring servers that never sleep. The job suits me. Minimal human interaction, just the steady hum of machines and the occasional crisis to solve. By the time I get home, the apartment building sits quiet as a tomb. My neighbors long since retreated behind their doors into their private worlds of sleep or Netflix binges. That Tuesday night 3 weeks ago started like any other. Keys jangling in the lock at 10:07 p.m. Work boots kicked off by the door. The familiar smell of my apartment. coffee grounds, dust, and something indefinably mine, greeting me like a loyal dog. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter and headed straight for the bathroom, craving the hot water that would wash away the electronic static of my workday. The shower had just reached that perfect temperature when I heard it, the unmistakable electronic chirp of my television coming to life. My muscles tensed under the stream of water. Through the thin bathroom door, I could make out the shifting light patterns dancing across my hallway wall. Blue, white, the occasional flash of commercial red. I shut off the water and stood there dripping, listening. The volume was low, just a murmur of voices, but definitely there. My rational mind immediately began constructing explanations. Timer function I'd accidentally set, power surge triggering the system, maybe even a neighbor's remote bleeding through the walls. These things happened in cheap apartments with thin walls and cheaper electronics. Wrapping a towel around my waist, I padded out to the living room. The TV glowed in the darkness, casting everything in that familiar, unsettling blue light that had replaced candlelight as humanity's preferred source of shadows. The channel was set to static, no signal, just that endless dance of black and white pixels that used to terrify me as a child. Something about the randomness of it, the way patterns would almost emerge before dissolving back into chaos. I grabbed the remote and clicked off. Darkness reclaimed the room. My wet feet had left prints on the hardwood floor, and I followed them back to the bathroom, telling myself stories about electromagnetic interference and faulty wiring. The next night, I made absolutely certain the TV was off before my shower. I stood in front of it, pressed the power button on both the remote and the unit itself, watched the little red LED confirm its sleeping state. Satisfied, I went through my routine: shower, shave, the small rituals that marked the transition from work self to home self. 10 minutes into the shower, that electronic chirp again. This time, I didn't even shut off the water. I knew what I'd find. Through the bathroom door crack, those shifting patterns of light painted my hallway in a rhythm I was beginning to recognize. Not random channel surfing, but something with intent, purpose, a pattern seeking recognition. This continued for a week. Every night at 10:17 p.m., I'd started timing it. The TV would spring to life while I stood vulnerable and naked under the water. The rational part of my brain, the part trained in troubleshooting and logic, began documenting the phenomenon. Same time, same static channel, same low murmur of white noise that almost sounded like voices if you listened hard enough. On the 8th night, I decided to break the pattern. Instead of showering, I sat on my couch at 10:15 p.m. and waited. The TV remained dark and silent. 10:17 came and went. 10:30, nothing. The moment I gave up and headed to the bathroom, the moment the shower water hit my skin, that familiar chirp echoed through the apartment. I'd like to say fear was my primary emotion, but it was something more complex. Frustration mixed with a kind of dreadful fascination. Whatever this was, it was responding to me, to my routines, my presence, or my absence. The next phase of my investigation seems obvious in retrospect, though at the time it felt like crossing a line from rational inquiry into something else. I set up my phone to record the living room, positioned it on the bookshelf with a clear view of the TV. That night, I went through my routine as normal, fighting the urge to rush through my shower. Reviewing the footage later, still damp and wrapped in my towel, I watched the timestamp hit 10:17. The TV remained dark. The room stayed silent. According to my phone, nothing had happened. Yet I knew with the certainty of lived experience, that I had heard it turn on, had seen those lights dancing on my walls. I watched the footage 3 more times, frame by frame, looking for some glitch, some sign that reality had stuttered. Nothing. According to the digital evidence, I was imagining things. According to my senses, the TV had been on. Sleep became elusive after that. I'd lie in bed, hyper-aware of every sound the apartment made, the refrigerator's hum, the settling of pipes in the walls, the occasional footstep from the unit above, and underneath it all, a kind of expectant silence, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I started researching online during my breaks at work. Forums dedicated to electronic voice phenomena, electromagnetic sensitivity, even carbon monoxide poisoning that could cause hallucinations. I checked my detectors, all functioning normally. I bought an EMF reader from a paranormal supply website, feeling ridiculous as I entered my credit card information. When it arrived, I swept my apartment like a discount Ghostbuster. The readings were normal, except for a slight spike near the TV, which the manual explained was typical for any electronic device. 2 weeks into this situation, I made a decision that felt both necessary and insane. I would unplug the TV entirely, remove it from the equation. Simple. That night, I made a show of it, though I wasn't sure who I was performing for. I pulled the power cord from the wall with a decisive yank, even wrapped the cord around the TV for good measure. The unit sat there, definitively powerless, a dead black mirror reflecting my apartment in warped miniature. I went to shower with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. The water had barely hit my shoulders when I heard it, not the electronic chirp this time, but the low murmur of static. Through the bathroom door, those familiar patterns of light painted my walls. My legs nearly gave out. I steadied myself against the shower wall, the tiles cold against my palm. This wasn't possible. The TV had no power source. Unless, and my mind raced through possibilities, unless there was some kind of battery backup I didn't know about, or residual charge in the capacitors, or... Still dripping, I stumbled into the living room. The TV sat dark and unplugged, exactly as I'd left it. But the lights were there, dancing on my walls, and the sound of static filled the room, emanating from nowhere and everywhere at once. I stood there naked and wet, watching light without source paint patterns on my walls, listening to white noise that had no speaker. That's when I noticed the pattern in the static wasn't random. There were shapes forming and dissolving in the visual snow on my walls, not on the TV screen, which remained dead and dark, but in the light itself. Shapes that almost looked like faces or figures or rooms. Another apartment maybe, superimposed on mine like a double exposure. I reached out to touch the wall where the light played, and my hand passed through the projection into something else. Not solid wall, but not empty air either. A thickness, a resistance, like pushing through heavy curtains or cold water. And beyond that resistance, a sensation of space that shouldn't exist, depth where there should be only drywall and insulation. I yanked my hand back. The lights continued their dance for another 30 seconds, then faded. The static sound lingered a moment longer, and in that last second before silence reclaimed my apartment, I could have sworn I heard something that wasn't quite random noise. Something that wasn't quite voices, but wasn't quite not voices either. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to approach this systematically. I measured the wall where I'd felt that strange resistance. Solid drywall, exactly where it should be. I knocked on it, listening for hollow spaces. Nothing unusual. I even borrowed a stud finder from my neighbor, pretending I was hanging pictures. The wall was exactly what it appeared to be. A barrier between my apartment and the next unit, which had been vacant for 3 months according to the building manager. That detail nagged at me. Vacant for 3 months. I'd never really thought about it, but I hadn't seen anyone go in or out of that apartment since... when? I tried to remember the last time I'd seen my neighbor. An older woman, kept to herself, always seemed to be watching through her peephole when I passed. When had she moved out? The manager said 3 months, but my memory suggested something different. Or maybe the same. Time had become slippery lately, days blending together in the repetition of work and home. Work and home. I spent the day researching the building's history, city records, old news articles, anything I could find online. The building was older than I'd thought. Built in 1947, renovated twice, once in the 70s, and again in 2001. There had been a fire in 1983 that damaged several units, including mine and the vacant one next door. No fatalities, the articles were careful to mention, though several tenants were hospitalized for smoke inhalation. That evening, I didn't go home immediately after work. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching my apartment building as darkness fell. Windows lit up one by one as people returned home, except for the unit next to mine, which remained dark, and my own unit, also dark, waiting for me. At 10:17 p.m. exactly, still sitting in my car, I watched my living room window flicker with the unmistakable pattern of television light. My apartment was empty. The TV was unplugged. And yet there it was, that dancing blue light, visible even from the parking lot. I could see other tenants' windows, their TVs creating similar patterns, but none quite matched the rhythm of mine. Mine had a signature now, a specific pattern I could recognize like a heartbeat. I sat there for another hour, gathering courage or losing my mind. I wasn't sure which. Finally, I went inside. The apartment was as I'd left it that morning. The TV unplugged, the wall solid, everything normal except for the growing certainty that normal was a word that no longer applied to my life. That night I didn't shower. I sat on my couch and waited. At 10:17, nothing happened. I waited another hour, still nothing. Finally, exhausted, I went to bed, falling into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of static and voices just beyond the range of understanding. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of running water. The shower was on. I lived alone, had always lived alone in this apartment, and the shower was running. I lay frozen in bed, listening to the water hit the tub, the pipes humming in the walls. The sound was coming from my bathroom, no question, but underneath it was an echo, or maybe an overlay, as if two showers were running in the same space, but not quite the same place. Moving carefully, I crept to the bathroom door. Through the gap at the bottom, I could see light. Not the harsh fluorescent of my bathroom, but something softer, warmer. Steam crept out, carrying a scent that wasn't my soap, wasn't any product I owned, something floral and old-fashioned, like the powder my grandmother used to wear. I pushed open the door. My shower was running, but the water wasn't hitting the tub. It was falling through the tub, through the floor, into some space that existed between here and there. And in that water, in the steam and the light that had no source, I could see the outline of someone else's bathroom. Same layout as mine, but different. Different tiles, different color scheme, a shower curtain with flowers where mine was plain white. And in that other shower, behind that flowered curtain, a shadow, a human shape, washing, going through the motions of an evening routine that had somehow gotten tangled with mine. As I watched, the shadow paused, as if suddenly aware of being observed. It turned toward me, and though I couldn't see features through the curtain and the dimensional haze, I knew it was looking at me, seeing me as clearly as I was seeing it. I stumbled backward, slamming the bathroom door. The sound of water continued for another minute, then stopped. Silence reclaimed the apartment, but it was a different kind of silence now. Occupied silence. Shared silence. The next day, I knocked on the door of the vacant apartment. No answer, of course. But I heard something inside. Footsteps, maybe. Or just the building settling. I pressed my ear to the door and heard what sounded like television static. Very faint. Like someone had left a TV on in an empty room. I found the building manager in his basement office, surrounded by the smell of cigarettes and mildew. When I asked about the apartment next door, he looked at me strangely. I pressed him for details. When had the tenant moved out? Why had it been vacant so long? He pulled out a ledger, flipped through pages that looked older than they should. According to his records, the apartment had been vacant for 3 months. The previous tenant, an elderly woman, had moved to a nursing home. But when he showed me the ledger, the dates didn't make sense. The entries seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, showing different months, different years. He noticed my confusion and laughed, a sound like grinding gears. The building had that effect on people, he said. Time got funny in old places. Then he looked at me more closely and asked if I'd been having trouble with my TV. The question hit me like cold water. How did he know? He smiled, showing too many teeth, and said the previous tenant of my apartment had complained about the same thing. And the one before that. always the TV, always at the same time, always when they were in the shower. It was just one of those things, he said. Buildings quirks, like how the elevator sometimes went to floors that didn't exist, or how voices carried through the vents from apartments that had been walled off in the 70s renovation. I wanted to ask more, but he was already turning away, dismissing me with a wave of his cigarette. As I left, he called after me with one last piece of advice. Don't unplug it. That just makes it worse. But it was already too late for that warning. That night, I didn't go home. I got a motel room across town, one of those places that charged by the hour but didn't ask questions. I showered there at 10:17 p.m., watching the mirror for any sign of flickering lights or shadows that didn't belong to me. Nothing happened. Just me, alone, in a dingy motel bathroom that smelled like bleach and desperation. But when I returned to my apartment the next morning, my TV was on. Not static this time, but a program. An old show from the 50s or 60s, the kind they used to run on late-night television before infomercials took over. Black and white, a family gathered around a dinner table. But something was wrong with the picture. The faces were blurred. Or maybe it was that they had too many faces, overlapping like double exposures. And the dialogue, though I could hear voices, wasn't in sync with the moving mouths. I stood there with my keys still in my hand, watching this impossible broadcast on my unplugged television. The family on screen continued their meal, their conversation, their existence in whatever space they occupied. Then one of them, the father figure, I think, turned and looked directly at the camera, directly at me. His mouth moved, and though the words didn't match, I understood what he was saying. You're late for dinner. The TV shut off. I've stopped showering at home. I go to the gym now, timing my visits to avoid 10:17 p.m. But it doesn't matter anymore. The boundaries have been compromised. I see the flickering lights at random times now, in the microwave display, in the reflection of my computer screen, in the surface of my coffee. Sometimes I catch glimpses of that other apartment, that other life playing out in parallel to mine. Last night I found a note slipped under my door. My handwriting, but words I didn't write. Stop fighting it. You're already home. I'm beginning to understand that maybe the building manager was wrong, or maybe he was lying. The apartment next door isn't vacant. It's occupied by someone going through motions that mirror mine, living a life that echoes across whatever thin barrier separates their reality from mine. Or maybe, and this thought comes to me in the small hours when the static is loudest, maybe I'm the echo. Maybe I'm the one who moved out 3 months ago and I just haven't realized it yet. The TV remains unplugged, but it doesn't matter. Every night at 10:17, I see those lights, hear that static, feel the presence of that other life pressing against mine. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I stopped resisting, if I stepped through that wall when the resistance gives way to something else. Would I find another apartment, another version of myself going through the same routines? Or would I find something else entirely? The truth about what happens in the spaces between channels, in the static between stations, in the vacant apartments that aren't quite vacant? I don't have answers. All I have is the growing certainty that my apartment, my life exists in a frequency that's bleeding into others. The boundaries are breaking down, and soon I won't be able to tell which side of the screen I'm on. Tonight, I'm going to shower at 10:17. I'm going to let whatever happens, happen. Because running hasn't worked, hiding hasn't worked, and the static is getting louder. The voices are getting clearer, and I'm starting to recognize one of them as my own.